Chargers go. Way to save the season to throw. Fire and down! Incomplete down at the goal line by San Diego. Tomlinson off the left side. Tomlinson sidestep. Hello, history books. They have to here's Sproles. Sproles inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Chargers win the game. Charger fans are witnesses to history.
What's up, everybody? What's up, good people? The post-draft show here, Lightning Round Podcast. Craig is back here, of course. Did our draft profiles all off-season long. So, of course, he's got to be back to do the draft profiles on the 7 guys they drafted. Jamie, of course, here. And we're going to – so, basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to each give our opinions on these guys. We all – broke down all 7 guys individually. We'll talk about what we like, what we don't like, the fit for the future, fit for the short term, where we'll see him in 2023. We'll give a little background info on how those picks unfolded, some other guys they may have looked at in that position, and everything else to kind of fill in the blanks there on each pick for every single guy. Then at the end, we'll give our favorite pick. We'll give our least favorite pick of these 7, and then we're going to give our overall draft grade of this 2023 Chargers draft class. So let's just go ahead, and Junior says happy birthday, Craig. So for anybody who didn't know, Craig celebrating the birthday in Mexico. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Junior. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, well let's just kick it off, and we'll start. Jamie, let's go ahead and begin with you. In the first round, the Chargers select Quentin Johnston, wide receiver, TCU.
I always get to start with Johnston. I did it during the wide receiver breakdowns too. So the good parts about Johnston's game, we talked about this during the wide receiver breakdown. Obviously, he's 6'3". He moves extremely well. He's elusive with the ball in his hands after the catch. He was a very big play wide receiver at TCU, made a lot of big plays down the field, also created big plays out of short throws after the catch. Key words there, after the catch. It's pretty clear that's why they drafted him. This is a team that had a really hard time creating after the catch last year. They'd catch a 5 or 7 yard pass. They might get a yard or 2. They'd be dragged down. They just were not able to make people miss and turn these short passes into big plays. And with Johnston, you get a guy who is able to, he has a go-to move. He has that head and shoulder fake where he either turns toward the sideline or towards the middle of the field and leaves corners in the dust. And he, even though he doesn't generally get to top speed that quickly as a route runner, it seems like he accelerates pretty quickly with the ball in his hands once he catches it. So the ability to make people miss, he's pretty slippery in space, finds seams to run through, and that is a huge missing element in this offense, and that's why they drafted him. He makes plays on the field. I think he's going to be a big part of the intermediate and deep passing game. He's going to need to be developed as a route runner. I'm not sure they're going to be able to use him on those kind of big boy contested catch, possession type plays, the digs, the slants, things like that in the middle of the field around the numbers and the hashes, just because right now it's not really he did it in college, but he still has a tendency to cut his routes off and alligator arm balls when he's expecting contact. So I think that's something they're going to have to work with him on. But he is a playmaker. He does add speed. He adds that yak ability, and it's pretty clear that that's what they liked about him.
Yeah, so just we're just going to all tag on to what we saw while watching these guys. So obviously we talked about it in the draft broadcast, the draft profiles, that he's got that desired size and frame. So he's 6'3", 208. He ran a 4.52 at the combine, which Wasn't great in a lot of people's minds, but he improved that time at the pro day. His vert and broad at the combine were both really, really good for guys his size. Where he struggled is the 3-cone and the shuttle. And I think that kind of shows up in the route running. He did run an extensive tree at TCU. I feel like he ran a bunch of routes, not that he ran them to perfection. I feel like in that TCU offense, he had a lot of different reps running a lot of different routes. What I saw and what kind of showed up in the testing numbers is kind of struggles to turn and accelerate out of those breaks. Jamie was kind of talking about that. I mean, he'll out jump you. He can box you out with his frame. Routes are still going to need to be refined. QJ, when matched up in zone, absolutely pokes holes in zone coverage. He's too big. He's too fast for defenders, just kind of vacating an area. That's where he can just kind of accelerate and move. He is a long strider. He creates that yards after contact, like Jamie mentioned. But I do want to say, and we talked about it on the when we went live, it feels like he can get the ball and accelerate and outrun you if you give him a 5-10 yard cushion. But to me, that yak ability is a lot of that physical running through contact. He'll throw a stiff arm. He'll just be a tough guy to tackle. And he's not a guy that's really going to just turn and burn past you, which is what we had talked about with a lot of these other wide receivers. But he's got really long arms. It helps him with a great catch radius. We saw it in college. On deep balls, I think he does a really good job of tracking those balls in the air. And to me, while watching him, he was a really good and willing run blocker. I thought he was more physical than I expected. I think he was kind of ahead in a lot of ways and a lot of these other receivers in this class in that regard. But with the aforementioned footwork, I think Johnston, again, sometimes will be pretty slow off the line of scrimmage. I think sometimes he just wants to jump and hop and juke at the line of scrimmage instead of just putting his fin in, turning and running and starting his route. It really, to me, feels like he struggles at the beginning of the route and at the end of his route. In the middle, he's scooting. Like everything accelerating, he's good. But I think he's got to work on being able to go full throttle during the entire process, from the beginning to the end. And then also, it just feels like the production was kind of all over the place. He, in 7 games this past season, he was held under 50 yards. We'll talk about his quarterback coming up soon. I don't want to lay that at his feet quite yet. We'll get to that. But the majority of the production came in like 4 games where he would put up like over 139 yards per contest in those 4 games. He exploded where he went like 206 against Kansas, you saw. And then in that first bowl game, the Fiesta Bowl against Michigan, he goes 163. He gets the offensive MVP. And then you get into that national championship game, and he follows it up with 1 catch for 3 yards in the national championship game against Georgia. Now, Georgia's got a stacked defense. That defensive line was giving Duggan problems, but it felt like once that game kind of got out of hand a little bit, he wasn't quite as sharp, kind of got a little lazy in his route running and everything. But at the end of the day, he only had 1 catch for 3 yards in 4 quarters. The other thing is what Jamie mentioned is the catch issues. He will alligator arm balls when there's contact, and he traps a lot of balls against his body. Telesco, after the draft, had mentioned they think that's something they can clean up. And if they can clean that up, you're golden. But there were a lot of kind of just concentration drops, not just, afraid to take a hit over the middle kind of drops, but just kind of still open, but looking to turn up field too quickly and will drop a ball. That's fine. But to me, Quentin Johnston, built as an X receiver, but I think he could play X or Z. I think that's what Craig was talking about during the draft process of him playing a Z, if I'm not mistaken. But I think, he's got the versatility. He played in the slot and out wide at both spots, but he's immediately the wide receiver 3. He can get yards on this offense after the catch. He'll be behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, offering another big target for Justin Herbert. Joshua Palmer then becomes wide receiver 4 as a rotational guy with another guy we'll talk about coming up here shortly who will be mixing into the offense. But Chargers get their wide receiver for the future, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Time might be up sooner than a lot of Charger fans might think. This is a man you can rotate in, a very high floor type guy in my mind, with the size and speed and athleticism. But they got their guy. Yeah, they needed a yak receiver, and they filled it with QJ.
Yeah, so Just kind of going back and looking at him again. I mentioned this on I Got Five yesterday, but had to go back and look at him with different eyes, especially after kind of getting a better understanding of how they want to utilize him in the offense. And I know we'll get to that a little bit later. Provide a little bit more context on the pick, but I think QJ is kind of that marriage between what the Chargers typically do and mixing something that they didn't have. So if they had a choice between getting somebody who could be a bit of a creator, you just want to get the ball in their hands and let them do their thing, then QJ offers that, but they didn't want to have to sacrifice size. So when you see Zay Flowers on the board and then Quentin Johnston, then of course, 9 times out of 10, QJ is going to trump them or him or whoever falls after him, a similar skill set, but smaller in size. So again, one of the things that I mentioned that I noticed right off the bat after rewatching him, getting past the issues with some of the drops and him not playing up to his size, was the tremendous foot speed in short areas. So I'm talking about everything from hitches, slants, screens. He's got tremendous footwork for a guy of his size. It's actually probably borderline elite. Even though he may not have the top end speed of someone a little bit smaller or one of the faster guys in the class, he does move faster than a 4.5. So that 4.49 is good, but I'd say his on-field speed is probably better than that. He's really aggressive after the catch to space. So you can see him trying to set up the moves. And yeah, as Garrett mentioned, there were some concentration issues where he was looking to make the second move before catching the ball. And yeah, you can correct that, but I understand what he was looking to do. He's trying to make a play. So he's almost always looking for the home run after he catches the ball, but sometimes it gets him in trouble because first things first, before you can gain any yards, you physically have to possess the ball. So that can get cleaned up. I was actually pretty also impressed with his ability to track the ball in the air deep. He doesn't have the most natural hands. I wouldn't call him a natural hands catcher, but he's got really good eyes. And you can see it whenever he positions his hands to catch the ball. They're almost always in the right spot. And it just depends on where the placement of the ball is. If it's away from his body and he's in space, he'll extend it and he'll catch it with the point in between the triangle. You'll see him do that. But it's when the ball gets on him that he won't extend his hands out. And what it allows is for the defender to get in and break up passes, and it shows up on tape. The ball will either get into his pads and he'll drop it because of that, or he'll get the ball and he won't possess it in enough time before a DB can come in and rake it out. And that happened on tape a few times. Some of the other issues, again, kind of mentioned it already, the cradle and basket catching as opposed to attacking the ball at its highest point. On comeback and in breaking routes, and I maybe mentioned this on the draft show, but keep in mind I had a lot to drink, so I don't necessarily remember. But there's a little bit of a tell that he has on a lot of his comeback and in breaking routes. So anything literally at 10 yards or more. So let's say a 4 route, which is a curl, or where you're coming 12 back to 10. Traditionally, that's your 4 route. Or if he does a 5, which is like a 10-yard out. That can be an issue as well. Or if you're talking about a 6, a dig route, he'll run the first 8 yards of his route and he'll be pretty low to the ground. It's almost like he's building up speed, and then he instantly pops up. So then it's all shoulders, face mask, and chest, and it's a dead giveaway to the corner or safety or whoever's defending them. And what they'll do is once they've gauged it, they can guess. They don't know what direction is going to go in, but sometimes they'll jump one way or the other, and it's led to some interceptions. And he does it almost every time. So anything that's going 10 yards or more, he doesn't really, and it's almost like sprinters. You're told it's basically a drive phase. So the first 15 to 20 yards or meters of a sprint, you have to have a lower position where you're exploding out of the blocks. Well, it's just like coming out of a stance for a route. Well, he'll do that for the first 7 to 8 yards. And then after that, he pops straight up. So that just, again, is a key to the defender that probably in a few yards, he's going to break one way or the other. So he's got to get that cleaned up. I like him running again, short area routes, slants, especially because if you can get his hands on the ball, then like that's when all hell breaks loose. Because he's a really aggressive runner after he gets the ball in his hands. It's pretty surprising, actually, the ball carrier vision that he has. The ability to see maybe 5 or 6 yards ahead of him and kind of set up moves that he's going to utilize to maybe break into the open. And somebody of his size typically doesn't have that type of movement ability to be able to process that fast as a runner and also set up those moves later down the field after he gets his hands on the ball. So overall, I was actually more impressed with him on the rewatch because I was watching for how he would be utilized within the system. So personally, I see him as a probable Z to start off. He'll more than likely trump Palmer at that wide receiver 3 position, but I mean, Palmer's still a good receiver, so there'll probably be some rotation there between 3 and 4. But as a staple in Moore's offense, where he runs a lot of 11 personnel, I can see QJ lining up in the Z position and running a lot in those level concepts where he's doing a bunch of crossers and then breaking routes where he can get his hands on the ball and just try to make it happen from there. So for me, it makes sense. The pick adds up a lot more when you have like some context as to where they plan on utilizing him. So again, like I know when we first graded him, I wasn't as high on him. I feel a lot better about him now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when the Chargers were on the clock, as we start our little backstory before we move on to the next pick, Chargers had a discussion about the 3 wide receivers remaining, which was Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, and of course, Quentin Johnston. Brandon Staley was a big fan of Zay Flowers. Chris Beatty, the Chargers wide receiver coach, had experience with Jordan Addison and recruiting him. He was a fan of his, but it was Telesco who was all in on QJ, and it was Kellen Moore who helped kind of push it over the edge because he had a plan for Johnston and his role in this offense. That was kind of the deciding factor in this pick here. He had big ideas of having QJ in a CeeDee Lamb type role like he had in Dallas and implementing Quentin Johnston in that role with the Chargers. So it was Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison as the main discussion of the 3, but they considered 2 other players at that position other than those 3, and it was tight end Dalton Kincaid and interior defensive lineman Mozzie Smith, both of which went a little bit later in the first round.
So for me, having the context of who they discussed and what pushed the pick over the top, as much as, I have concerns about some of the things in QJ's game, knowing that they have a specific plan for him and that they leaned on Moore's plan and his preference in making the pick, it's hard to object to the process and how they went about making that pick.
Yeah.
And let's face it, if they had wound up with Mozzie Smith, I think we all would have been pretty pissed off. So,
it could have been worse is the thing you're going with right here.
It could have been a hell of a lot worse. So yeah. I think in the end, they correctly evaluated the wide receiver room, which I think was something we were all worried about. They knew they needed speed, but more so than speed, they needed twitch and they needed guys who could create after the catch. And they got somebody who does that. I'm going to be curious to see how his go-to move after the catch translates to the NFL, because I think it is pretty predictable. And I think NFL corners for the most part can tackle. And he was the best athlete on the field pretty much every Saturday in the Big 12, regardless of who they played. I mean, defense is kind of an abstract idea in the Big 12. It's not really a phase of the game.
It's scary. Yeah.
It's bad. Will that translate? We'll see. He's definitely athletic enough to make it happen. He does show the ability to make moves. Like Craig said, he can string moves together. He can find open creases and find the open field. You look at some of the plays he made after the catch, particularly the one that he made in the Michigan game in the national semifinal, where he caught like a 5-yard drag inside their own 20 and took it to the house.
Yeah.
The Chargers didn't have anybody who could do that last year. And now they do. And they might actually have 2 people who can do that now. So in that respect, at least they understood what their weaknesses were, and they did everything they could to address them. And it's really hard to quibble with that at the end of the day when they had two athletes like Johnston and his teammate Davis, and they're clearly focused on creating big plays out of quick passes, and they have a clear plan for Johnston.
Yeah. And just an aside, I mentioned the kind of how Johnston feels like he's got a higher floor of these other wide receivers. I feel like Telesco's been a safe kind of draft picker throughout his kind of tenure. And it feels like Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison don't really meet your threshold. And it was just an easy, like, if QJ doesn't work out, we've got a pretty good wide receiver 2 or 3. If he peaks, we got ourselves another wide receiver 1. Where Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers, the absolute floor could drop out if they don't, make it work in the NFL level. So part of me believes that it was also kind of the safer bet to take QJ. Not that I know anything about it. It just feels like a Telesco thing to be like, well, I don't want to gamble on these other guys. They may be faster, but Quentin Johnston, I feel like, has the higher floor. So let's just go with the safer wide receiver here. But really, what makes the most sense is the fact that they leaned on Kellen Moore and said, "You've got a plan. Let's go with it." And I think at the end of the day, if you lean on your coaching staff and they've got a plan already ready, it's hard to not give them what they want.
You could argue that, if they can correct some of these issues that he has, and some of them are correctable because he's flashed it. You've seen in a few games, particularly I look back at the game against OK State last year. He went for 8 receptions, 180 yards, and had a TD. You see him make some big time catches, contested catches, where he gets up in the air and physically plucks the ball away from defenders. He just doesn't do it consistently.
Yeah,
if you can fix that and get him to use his hands more so than be a body catcher, he's got all the other tools to be probably the highest ceiling player at the position in the draft. So they've got someone that they can work with that, like, as Garrett mentioned, worst case scenario, he can be a high-end number 2. But if you get it right, and the Chargers do have a very good receivers coach, he works really well with these guys. You're talking about somebody that in 2 or 3 years could be the guy.
Yeah. So let's just real quick before we move on to Tuli, do you guys feel better about drafting QJ now than you did when they drafted Mike Williams?
I think so. I do, just because you're in a completely different part of the draft. I mean, they took a guy who clearly, in my opinion, was not one of the top 10 players in this draft. I think I had a 2nd round grade on him, and they took him in the top 10. So, I feel better about QJ just because of where they got him, because he fits a very specific need. And I think as we get through the rest of the guys in this draft, I think what we're going to find out is they really, more so in this draft than in any draft, it seems like they're really betting on very specific traits in each of these picks, traits and skill sets. And I think it bodes well because it shows that they're recognizing what some of their weaknesses are.
Yeah, I was going to say it was really where they were drafted. I just feel like because Mike Williams was 7, they had the 7th pick then.
Yep.
Yeah, the fact that they took him that high for a guy who's really been one-dimensional, which, I mean, he's been fine for the Chargers, but QJ, I think, offers a lot more value there, picking it towards the end of the 1st round. And really, he's got more than just that one kind of aspect of his game. Craig?
I definitely feel better about it, as both of you guys mentioned, from a value perspective, where the pick was. But also, we also have to keep in mind the reason why that Mike Williams pick was made was almost kind of sort of under duress, because that's what Phil wanted. That was the same draft as the
Deshaun
potential
Watson.
lady violator. Yes. So
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Sorry. Thank you, Jamie. Allegedly. So that was the draft where I think Lynn was looking at grabbing him, and Phil made a fuss, and they got Phil's guy instead. And in my opinion, also they reached for him. So it plugged a hole, but it wasn't necessarily what the team wanted to do. It was more of like the backup plan, the contingency plan for what the initial was. So overall, this just feels like a more natural pick. There's a plan for it. And I like what he brings to the table. It's a bigger toolbox than what Mike offers.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move on to round 2. So on the top of day 2, the Chargers select the interior defensive lineman / edge UCLA out of UCLA, Tuli Tuipulotu, a name I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce a lot faster than that. Craig, why don't you start us off?
All right. So again, while I was partaking in adult libations, I don't know, man. I might have some sort of Rain Man thing going on because I said like 2 or 3 things and they actually ended up happening. I mouthed like not trying to do it. I said, oh, we still have to get the obligatory USC pick off of the board. And then they got Tuli. I'm like, oh, you got to be freaking kidding me. So I hadn't done a bunch of Tuli work initially because, like I said before, I watched maybe like 10 or 12 plays of him. I didn't like what I saw. I mean, I didn't love it. It was okay. But I just didn't see him as a fit in the defense based on what I felt like they needed at an edge player. And then there was the whole weight thing. Like, is he 290? He doesn't look 290. I'm not seeing a whole lot of bend or twitch off the edge. I don't know. It looks kind of boring. I like the effort, but I want somebody with a little bit more juice. So after going back and like looking at him again, he never looked 290. So I don't know where that came from. But some of the things that I really liked about him is he had very good play awareness for a guy that's only 20 years old. So he did a really awesome job IDing screens. And so he'd vacate his rush to go chase down the screen. And a lot of times he would either help it be stopped for next to nothing at all, or you help to break it up altogether. He wins with power and he displays like a really solid use of hands, and he'll bully tight ends and some tackles. He actually flashed a little bit of a 2-arm swipe and rip move. So that was a little surprising. He has like this little patented little hop move that he does along with the 2-hand swipe, and it's really effective. And I think he catches tackles off guard with it because they're used to him just trying to bully his way around the edge. And so he adds a little bit of finesse there. It's funny because it worked almost every time I saw him use it. He's really got a quick first step after he sheds his block. And he does this thing also where he'll use the weight of a guard or a tackle to push off and propel himself towards like a quarterback or ball carrier. So it adds like this little element of juice, a little bit more than what he may have naturally. So that's really crafty, again, for a younger player. As far as the production goes, 22 tackles for loss and 13 and a half sacks last year. So you can't argue with that. And we all know how the Chargers feel about production. He was also really adept at sifting through trash on the inside, and he'd create pressures that didn't always result in sacks, but he'd do a really good job at forcing QBs into incompletions or off their spot and into surrounding pressure. So again, some of the things that I still have questions about. Where is he going to, like, what is his play weight going to be? Because I saw reports where he was around 290 and then he dropped to 266. So I can understand where they want to play him. Like, they want to move him around, have him be a stand-up edge, play some 5 tech. I don't really see him doing any 4-eye stuff. It doesn't really make sense to me if he's going to be under 280 pounds. Because his game is super reliant on power. So you're going to have to, if you're going to do stuff like that with him, it would have to be in like sub packages, or else it doesn't really make sense. He's going to need to expand his arsenal of pass rush moves to win consistently, because right now he definitely relies on power. He does have that one little specialty move, but he needs to build out from there. And he can be neutralized if he doesn't win with his first move. So he's got to get better there. Where I see him kind of out of the gate, probably more of a rotational stand-up edge, and they'll reduce him down a little bit to play some 5 tech, I guess. Again, this is kind of all contingent upon what his play weight's going to be. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But moving down the line, long term, I think he can be a power rushing edge 2 with the versatility to move down with a situational edge player, maybe on his hip, playing off of his hip. So I think he's a good player. Again, the production is probably what caught the Chargers' eye. Also, being a USC dude, all that plays into it. It was something that they loved. He kind of now, the more I looked at it, seemed like like the ideal Chargers player or someone that Tom Telesco would be in love with. So the more, again, I watched it, the more it made sense. The less, I guess, I wasn't really super annoyed by it overall. I guess we were kind of looking at guys that were on the board at the time and thinking that they should go a different direction, particularly at tight end. But again, I didn't dislike the pick, and I get it. It makes sense. I like him in a rotation behind Bosa and Mack and able to learn there and even being on the field with them at the same time. If one of those guys has to miss any extensive time at all, I feel better about him being on the field, particularly against the run, than I would do a Chris Rump. So score points for that as well.
Yeah. And Jamie, before you give your notes on them, just want to mention that these first 3 picks are guys all 3 of us mentioned throughout that Tom Telesco draft, which was pointed out to me on Twitter yesterday, that fake Tom Telesco draft we did at the end that everybody got really depressed about. As we were going through names, we're like, man, it's going to be QJ, or Tuli seems like a Telesco guy, or man, they're going to draft Henley, aren't they? The 3 of us, between the 3 of us, we all kind of mentioned offhand. We didn't pick them at different points, but we definitely mentioned how these all felt like Telesco guys. So Jamie, tell us about Tuli.
So he was not at all what I expected. Based on the feedback that you gave when they drafted him, I didn't watch him prior to the draft, so I had very limited knowledge of him. But I was expecting a guy who needed a shit ton of help getting to the quarterback. I was expecting lots of stunts and twists, lots of effort and cleanup sacks, and not a whole lot of things that he can hang his hat on. What I saw when I watched him was, like Craig mentioned, I like the hands. The hands are pretty heavy. They're active. They're fairly educated for a guy who's 20. I think the counters are still coming, but you can see he's got a bit of a stab move. He has a rip move. I think I saw a swim. As a stand-up edge, you can see him bending around tackles, ducking and bending under tackles. He shows the ability to turn and flatten the corner, which is a good thing. He's not super bendy. He's not Gumby coming around the edge, and he's not going to just make a right turn or a left turn and get to the quarterback, but he can flatten the edge, which is encouraging. I personally liked him a lot better with his hand in the ground than I did standing up. I thought he played with better leverage with his hand in the ground. I thought his first step was better with his hand in the ground. His first step is average, maybe slightly above average. It kind of switches back and forth depending on how he's coming off the line of scrimmage. He did play all over the line. I mean, I saw him play some 5 technique. I think he played some 3. He played standing up. There were times where he lined up off ball and just charged opposing guards in the A gap, which he had a lot of success doing in a few games. He did flash against the run. A lot of his production came in a handful of games. He's a guy who had 13 and a half sacks last year. I think 10 of those sacks came in 4 or 5 games against some of the worst offensive lines in the league. So some of his stats might have been a little bit inflated, but I think you can see some potential there. I think the concern that I have is, 1, I don't love him standing up. 2, I think the length is a little bit lacking. So he's probably not going to win the punch a whole lot, at least not right now. And I'm not sure really how he's going to win consistently at the NFL level because of the fact that I don't love him standing up and he doesn't have a ton of juice off the edge. There is some there, and that can probably be developed by anticipating snap counts and working on his first step and things like that. But I'm not sure how he's going to win. And I think in order for him to win, he's going to have to become a technician. Those hands are going to have to be almost perfect every time, or he's going to get outreached by tackles and he's going to have a hard time. And he's going to need to develop some counters. The bull rush is solid. The rip move is solid. There's a bit of a spin. There's a bit of a swim. Things that can be worked on. He's athletic enough that I think those things can be developed into legitimate pass rushing tools. They're just not all the way there yet. As far as run defense goes, I think he's probably a better backside run defender than he is a natural edge setter. He's so quick off the line, and he actually understands blocking schemes really well that he just shoots right through pulling guards on the backside and closes and finishes. And he finishes outside of his frame extremely well. He can move from one gap to the next. Lots of things to like about him. I think there's lots of things to be developed. I think he's probably going to have a lot of success versus guards initially, and the success against tackles is going to come later as the counters and the hand technique develop. And we'll see how he does as a stand-up pass rusher. But I think, in this scheme, you can see him playing some 5 technique, maybe some 4-eye, and standing up on occasion, maybe lining him up as a stand-up edge with either Bosa or Mac reducing inside with their hand on the ground, things like that. There are ways that you can get him open. Was not as effective on the stunts and twists as I expected. That's where I thought most of his production was going to come from. He's kind of sluggish, almost indecisive, like he's not sure what he's supposed to be doing on those stunts and twists at times. But I like the pick. I went back and I graded him after watching him, and I had a 75 on him. I know we're not doing grades for this show, but just by basis of comparison, he wound up getting the same grade that Derek Hall got from me. And Hall was a guy who he was the last of the edges that I was okay with in the second round, and he went early in the second. So he was a top 50 to 60 player for me, I think, at the end of the day. I don't remember exactly where he wound up, but if you're drafting 54 and you get a top 50 to 60 player, you've probably made a pretty good pick, and now it's just about developing the traits that you're betting on.
Yeah, I was just looking up my to see where I had him graded, because I think I was around the same as you there with 76. Yeah, we're right there. So, yeah, that's about the grade I gave him pre-draft. So, yeah, they lined Tuli up everywhere. Like they wanted to use that athleticism to his advantage, inside, out wide. They stood him up off the line, and they even had him drop back in coverage a couple times. So, he did it a lot. He had his hand in the dirt. He was standing up, rushing off the edge. He didn't test at the combine, so we don't know like how really how explosive he is. But you can tell just on tape that he's got impressive acceleration, especially when attacking the gaps. It's why he was super productive. I felt like there were a lot of times where they rushed him behind some studs and twits upside in front of him, and he was pretty successful. I know you didn't quite think that, but I thought there was a lot of that. But he is one of the youngest prospects in this draft class. He was 20. The frame is filled out pretty nicely, but it looks like he's got some room to grow too, which is nice depending on where they want to put him. Like Craig was mentioning, it's going to be interesting to see where they put him and where his fit is going to be. As an edge rusher, wins with speed. We talked about the power and the bull rush. He has shorter arms, so he doesn't win with length all that often. And it just feels like he's going to try to run by you or through you. But like everybody's mentioned, he's got a lot of different moves. We've seen an inkling of a lot of different moves from him, even at as young as he is. He'll mix up his timing to kind of catch tackles off balance. He's got a spin move, which I thought was pretty good, which he'll switch up, rip and pull. He'll hand swipe. He's got the hands have just shades of what could be, which seems promising if they can really develop it. Because what I was going to mention and what Jamie mentioned, he's got to be really, really good with his hands because he just doesn't have that length. So inside wins with athleticism and the play strength and the power. In the run game, it feels like he struggles to anchor against bigger linemen because he's kind of lighter for that end playing inside. But I know it's the first thing that everybody picks up on, and it was part of all of his draft profiles that people talked about after he was drafted. But he's got a motor that's absolutely pinned to max engage. He has some cleanup sacks. If QB stay in the pocket too long, he will chase down ball carriers in backside pursuit. If he doesn't win initially, the peer pursuit will usually get him right back into plays. So even if he's kind of starting to get stalled, just the drive will get him at least back in the area to make a play again. So he was super productive. He had 13 and a half sacks. He led the nation in sacks, second in college football with 22 tackles for a loss. So he could really get behind the line of scrimmage. The fit is what it's going to be interesting. He's not really twitchy enough to rush off the edge full time, and the arms are pretty short to go against NFL tackles full time. He's really too light right now to play end full time. So he's going to be probably playing a mix of both. Brandon Staley said that he sees him in the Zadarius Smith type role. getting some work off the edge on early downs, use that bigger body on the outside to steal the backside on run plays, then pin him inside on passing downs to add some athleticism inside. So they seem like they have a role for him, but it's not fully defined as he's an end or he's an edge. It's going to probably be a mix of both. So just some backstory on where they were when they were about to pick Tuli. The Chargers were hoping for 3 edge players. They had 3 edge players on their board that they wanted to go and hoping to go edge in the second round. The 3 edge guys they had on their board was BJ Ojolari, Keon White, and Tuli. I asked about where the Chargers ranked both edges, Derek Hall and Isaiah Foskey, which actually got drafted before Tuli, and they said that Tuli was ahead of both of them. So Tuli was part of the big 3 on the edge players. They also mentioned that they were thinking about going tight end there. They had 3 guys in that range in the second round, which was Sam Laporta, Michael Mayer, and Luke Musgrave. None of them fell to the Chargers, so they didn't have a conversation about that. Darnell Washington, physical red flags kind of turned them off a little bit, so they didn't consider him there in the second round. So after those 3 tight ends were gone, they weren't comfortable taking another tight end. They also thought about pulling the trigger on Joey Porter Jr. or Brian Branch if they fell. Neither did. So it was easy. Tuli was part of their big board. They fell to him, and they were really happy about it. He was part of their short list. And the Zadarius Smith comp is a thing for Tuli. He's going to play inside and out. Tuli was a Telesco guy. He fell in love with him during the process. We talked about the whole fell in love with USC thing. That probably played a part too. So Tuli doesn't have to go anywhere. He's staying in Southern California. Chargers were happy to get him and happy that he fell to them, and they got their guy in the second round. So
you can almost, with some of these guys, pretty much all of them, you can almost go back to the tape and see which game it was that made them fall in love with these guys. With Tuli, I feel like the Washington State game last year was the game that really stood out for them because he completely wrecked that game.
3 sacks, right?
Yep, 3 sacks. I think he had 4 or 5 tackles for loss. He was all over the place, all over the quarterback the whole game, and really disruptive against the run. And, with QJ, I feel like it's the Michigan game, him standing out against elite competition, that catch and run that I mentioned earlier on the drag route. Almost all of these guys, you can point to a game and be like, yep, that's the one. That's the one that stood out that got them drafted.
Yeah, because I watched that Kansas State game and he had over 200 yards, and I was like, that's awesome. He looks great, but this is Kansas, And then you turn on the Michigan game and you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is what sealed it.
Yeah,
like Kansas was nice, but that Michigan game was kind of that cherry on top for QJ.
Yeah, he really cooked Julius Brents in that Kansas State game. And of course, he was a bigger name amongst the cornerbacks. So that was probably a box that was checked for them.
They loved Brent too. So you knew that they watched that game going against each other and went, wait a minute, if we like Brent's this much and QJ's doing pretty good. Yeah. You could definitely tell. All right. So now we move on to the third round. And it is the linebacker, Daiyan Henley, out of Washington State. Henley committed to Nevada as a wide receiver. He moved to safety 2 years later, then landed at linebacker for 2 more years before transferring to Washington State. He's pretty new at the position of playing linebacker. He's only played for 3 seasons throughout his whole career, and he had his best season to date in 2022. Because he's got that wide receiver DB background, really feels like he's got a natural feel in the open field. He also played in that kind of a versatile role at Wazoo, standing up as an inside linebacker, covering the slot. He was on overhang, rushed off the edge. So he's got a lot of versatility that he can definitely offer the Chargers. He's athletic with a muscular frame and coverage. His technique is pretty sound. He's a sound mover, running sideline to sideline, dropping back in his back pedal. The click and close is quick. He plays the ball nicely in the air. Had 4 interceptions 2 years ago, 1 last season, and has had 4 pass deflections in the last 2 years. He's also best in man. In zone, it's kind of more of an issue. In the run game, for Henley, it's some good and some bad while rewatching him. He's a strong tackler. I just feel like the technique isn't all that great. Feels like he tackles high at times. Kind of has a little bit of issues tackling in space. He's also short and light for the position. He's only 6'2", 225. So He attacks the line of scrimmage with speed, which works at times, but will sometimes attack the wrong gap. And if a lineman gets a hold of him, it's usually an issue because he is kind of a lighter linebacker. Once a lineman kind of square him up, he feels like he's got to be kind of that wrecking ball, and he'll throw his body at him. He doesn't really kind of extend and stack and shed, which I like in my linebackers. But he just throws his body at linemen, and sometimes he'll get thrown out of place. Sometimes he'll create chaos, but not all the time. He kind of wavers on reading his keys. It'll cause him to just run downhill, which will make him over pursue. I mean, he's ready to go, but sometimes he's not as smart about it as he should. As a pass rusher, wins with speed, plenty of experience getting after the quarterback. He's also was the team's best special teams player while watching him. So Daiyan Henley has a role in this Chargers defense right away, kind of swapping snaps with Kenneth Murray. Will probably work in more snaps as the season ticks on. To make the team better at covering in the second level. He'll kind of be a work in progress against the run, giving you both some really good and some bad snaps, but he can take over that tranquil role as a blitzer from that linebacker spot, and he can definitely contribute on special teams too. So that's huge. Not to mention, he is one of my absolute favorite personalities on this team already. Once they drafted him, leather vest, no shirt, white Ranger at the end of his chain. He won points with me, and not that I loved his tape all that much, but love the personality. The Chargers didn't pick up Kenneth Murray's fifth-year option, so we could see kind of this transition year with Henley taking over for Murray as the season progresses. I'd like to see Henley be more physical. Since he's still kind of learning the position there, I think there's going to be some bumps and bruises early on in the season, but the athleticism is definitely going to serve him well. I really hope if I'm this coaching staff, I hope Eric Kendricks can really just grab a hold of Henley, and Henley just follows him everywhere and shadows him, because there isn't really a more technically sound linebacker than a guy like Eric Kendricks. He could offer so much for a guy like Henley. He should absorb as much as he can as soon as possible. If he can get just a little bit of Eric Kendricks, you got a pretty good linebacker. If the physicality improves, the instincts progress, this feels like kind of the Quan Alexander, Dre Greenlaw type of career arc for a Daiyan Henley. I don't think he's a staple of your offense and the leader of your second level, but I think he could be an enforcer in time if he can just improve on some of these things. So I like the pick here. It's kind of about the range I had him graded at. I think it was the top of 4, but bottom of 3. It's about the right range. It makes a ton of sense. And we'll kind of talk about the background and why they picked Daiyan Henley, but a guy, you got to love the personality right away.
So I went back and watched Henley again. I had a late 4th round grade on him initially, and I went back and watched him again. And I think the things that stand out, and you mentioned a lot of it, he is a superb athlete. He is a guy who is going to have legitimate sideline to sideline range as he develops. The only thing that's really holding him back right now, which you mentioned, is he struggles with reading his keys. His reads are really inconsistent. There are times where his how can I put this? His eyes and his feet are not trying to be nasty. His eyes and his feet are extremely connected, which is to say there's very little eye discipline. So he has a tendency to, his eyes follow motion. They follow the movement of the offensive line. If somebody's pulling, his eyes will follow. And as his eyes follow, his feet follow, and he can get pulled out of position. There are other times where he just gets stuck watching the quarterback and his feet get stuck and he's just not moving. Because he's new to the position, he can struggle with having a feel for second level blockers, and he'll just stick to them. He'll wait, they'll climb up into his lap, and they'll stick to him, and he can't get free. Because he is so athletic, when he does read his keys well, he can kind of squirt through traffic, navigate traffic, and get to the ball quickly. He's really good coming downhill. He's really good as a blitzer, run blitzer. They blitzed him a lot in passing situations. Like Garrett said, they played him all over the front 7, and he had a lot of success doing that. 12 tackles for loss this year, 4 sacks. He's probably better in a role where he's just freed up to attack the line of scrimmage consistently versus the run, as opposed to just reading and reacting to his keys. In coverage, he's extremely natural. Probably the two best coverage linebackers in this class were Henley and now I'm blanking on his name, the kid from Clemson.
Simpson.
Yeah, Trenton Simpson. They were probably the two best, most natural coverage linebackers in this class. And in that regard, they're very similar. I had much different grades on Simpson and Henley. They're very similar in the fact that reading their keys is still a work in progress, but they're both very comfortable in coverage, and they're both good coming downhill. Simpson is a more natural pass rusher. Henley is more of a blitzer. Simpson is more of a natural pass rusher, which is what separated them from me. But I do think, they're clearly betting on traits here. Again, I mentioned it earlier. This was a very traits-driven draft. They're betting on traits. They're betting on the athleticism. They're betting on the ability to cover. This is kind of similar to Murray when they drafted him, in that he's very raw and he's still developing the instincts as a linebacker. But the difference is Henley can cover. And all they're really teaching Henley is how to read his keys and when to get downhill and how to get home. With Murray, they were teaching him how to cover. They were teaching him how to read his keys. They were teaching him how to tackle. They were teaching him how to get downhill and get home. So they were basically rebuilding Murray's game entirely from the ground up. With Henley, they know they can put him in there probably as a dime linebacker early on and have him cover. They can mix him in with blitzes like they did with Tranquil, and he'll probably have a lot of success doing that. He'll flash against the run. And they might even be able to develop some edge skills in him. He doesn't have great length, but because of his athleticism and his bend and his burst, he might be able to have some success on the edge at times too. So I like him a little bit more than I did when I initially graded him. I got to watch more tape. And again, I mentioned this with Tuli. You can point to one game with him and say, that's the one. Mm-hmm. With him, it was the Apple Cup against Washington this year. Henley caught a fourth down pass on a fake punt. He forced a fumble. He had a bunch of tackles for loss, and he was just all over the field in the game. And that's the game where you point out and be like, yep, that's the one that caught their eye. That's the one that put him over the top. So he's going to make an immediate impact on special teams. He'll probably make an immediate impact as at least a dime linebacker in sub packages. And then they'll sprinkle him in as linebacker 3, probably rotate him and Murray out. And hopefully by the end of this year, he's giving them good reason not to bring Murray back.
Yeah. I hope it's that transition year. Craig?
Yeah, so the way I look at Henley is kind of like clay that's still being molded, not to the effect of like what Kenneth Murray was, because like Jamie said, essentially they had to start from scratch, and you're going to draft a guy that high and plug him on the field from day one. It's probably not the best place to have to be. But with Henley, some of the things I really like about him is he loves to torpedo through gaps in the run game to chop down backs before they can get north and south, like especially against stretch plays. He's really good about that. You can see the aggression there. And as a linebacker, that's one of those traits that you almost have to have, especially if you're a smaller guy. He picks up on blocking patterns during games. So say, for instance, he may not be able to diagnose something really early, but he's really smart in the way that he starts to understand the patterns. And then as the game develops, you'll see him start to beat blockers to the point of attack, to kind of throw runs off. He'll screw up the timing of them and have, even if he doesn't make the tackle, he'll have backs redirect. So it's nice to be able to see someone learn on the fly. So he has the football IQ for that. The sideline to sideline speed and explosiveness is very evident. That's already been mentioned like ad nauseum. I think he's going to be very good as a zone defender because of the spatial awareness that he gained when he played safety initially. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So like in this way, it's going to be beneficial long term, but right now it sort of kind of hurts him, and I'll get to that in a minute. When he's manning up tight ends and backs, he mirrors them really well because he kind of follows the golden rule, and it's something that like most of us, if we play ball, especially if you play any defense at all, it's one of the things you were taught early on. When you're square with someone, you want to follow their hips because You know what? Nobody was expecting a Shakira reference. Hips don't lie.
Hey.
The man has to go. Yeah, there you go. The man has to go where the hips go. And that allows him to be very, very good when he's manned up with someone that he's square with. You saw that at the Senior Bowl when he was doing a lot of those one-on-one reps. Guys just weren't getting open. And because they came off the line of scrimmage square, he followed their hips and he would beat them to the point, or at least get there at the same time as them and be able to break up on passes. He actually had a really crazy high tackle success rate. It was over like 94%. Mm-hmm. So if he gets to the ball carrier, they're basically guaranteed to touch turf. He still isn't the strongest guy because of the size, but he is relatively secure in tackling when he wraps up. He's also really shifty in the box. So offensive linemen have a hard time being able to line him up to block him. So he does this thing where a lot of times you've heard about running backs getting skinny in the hole. He kind of does that as a linebacker. And it's almost funny to watch them try to stalk him to get blocks on him. And he just kind of squirts by him and gets in the backfield and make plays. Really one of the things that are going to stand out where he's going to contribute initially right off the bat, he's going to be a dynamo on special teams. Dude played gunner as a linebacker at Washington State, which I'm not sure I've heard of very many linebackers playing gunner. Mm-hmm. So just as a core special teams guy, he's going to be a menace. And I'm sure that played a huge part in them drafting him where they did, even though like I saw a lot of guys were grading him in around that area anyway. So it wasn't like a reach, but just what he can contribute from a special team standpoint, and then he'll work his way into the defense. And again, gradually, this could be hard. Y'all guys familiar with the movie Friday at all? Mm-hmm. Or anybody out there? So Kenneth Murray, that's your ass, Mr. Postman. Be on the lookout, dude, because your days are probably numbered. It looks like that's the direction it's going to go, unless this lights a fire under Kenneth and maybe forces him to, maybe study a little harder, put a little bit more work in. I'm not trying to, say anything super negative about the kid. I'm sure he tries really, really hard, but maybe this will be something that lights a fire under him. As far as some of the things that he needs to work on, of a few tackles that I did see him miss, it was more because he took really poor angles and he overran targets. And then you kind of see him like on skates a little bit, reaching back to kind of catch guys, and it almost never works because he just doesn't have the length for it. He'll sometimes play too shallow, like in cover 2, and he can have throws go over his head, just kind of due to lack of getting proper depth. And also when you don't have the length to compensate for that, you're going to be a little bit of a liability there. And again, like I mentioned before, where his spatial awareness paid dividends for him, or will pay dividends for him because he plays safety, it hurts him as a linebacker because he doesn't diagnose like a second level player. He sees things like he's in the deep third, and you see things back there a little bit more slowly, so you can react more slowly. He's not accustomed to the sped up time in the box. So he plays like he's 15 to 18 yards off of the line as opposed to 5. And so with time, as he gets accustomed to playing the position, because he's still kind of in his infancy stages there, it'll get better. But for right now, it could be a little bit of a problem. And yeah, he can get swallowed up on the inside due to his lack of size. And I mean, outside of that, I think he's a really solid player. And the same thing, going back and kind of keying in on him more after he was the pick, because, when we're doing these draft evaluations, we watch kind of a limited amount of some of these guys, so we don't get to see the best of them. We can dissect them a little bit more now that we know who they are and we have like a vested interest there. I like him actually a lot more than I did initially. I mean, he was fine before, but I see the vision with him. And right now, I really like the prospects of him. And this sounds weird because a lot of people don't really care about this phase of the game. I really, really am excited about what he'll be as a special teams contributor off the bat. I think he'll be pretty good once he gets regulatory snaps on defense, but just starting off, I think you'll see his name called a bunch for making big plays on special teams. Yeah, I agree.
I'm pretty sure he played on every special teams unit at Washington State. I was watching him, I think it was against the Washington game, and I'm pretty sure he was on the punt team, he was on the PAT team, he was on the kickoff team. I think he was on every single unit on special teams, as he was either blocking or rushing a kicker or a gunner or whatever, but he was everywhere.
Yeah, no, he was. And I am too. I'm excited to see how he contributes on special teams right away. I agree with Craig. That'll be exciting. So let's when they made the pick, let's talk about what happened in the room. So linebacker was the target in the third round. Jack Campbell's already taken by the Lions in the first round, which was wild. But they had 3 on the board. It was Trenton Simpson, Drew Sanders, and Daiyan Henley. Drew Sanders was their 4th ranked linebacker. They did not think he was a very good fit. They viewed him more as an edge. They just drafted Tuli. It didn't really match up for them. Trenton Simpson was their linebacker 1. But both Campbell and Daiyan Henley were graded out the same. So they're about in the same range. And their rankings weren't that far off from Trenton Simpson, meaning the separation between linebacker 1 and linebacker 2-3 wasn't all that big. So it really made it a preferential choice for the coaching staff when it came down to Simpson and Henley in the 3rd round. Staley really favored Henley, was kind of calling out his name like, hey, man, what if Henley falls, as the 3rd round starting to go on. And so when the pick happened, they discussed Trenton Simpson. They discussed Daiyan Henley. And when they're on the clock, they pulled the trigger on the guy Staley was more excited about, which was Daiyan Henley. They favored him, and that was the pick in round 3.
Yeah, again, we talk about process a lot, something that we focused on even more in the last couple of years. And if they're listening to their coaches, and in this case, they're giving their head coach what he wants. Yeah. I think, again, just like with QJ, it's hard to quibble with the process. Mm-hmm. If that's absolutely what Staley wanted, then and we know he missed out on Flowers because that's who he wanted in the first round.
Right.
Then
so that's the other thing that played in, because Telesco loved QJ, got QJ. Telesco loved Tuli, got Tuli. So Telesco kind of backed away and said, let's give Staley the guy that he really, really wanted. He lost out on Zay. Let's get him a guy that he was excited about. So they did.
Yeah, and it's hard to be upset with that process and winding up with a guy like Henley, who clearly will provide special teams value right away and will probably help out quite a bit with coverage on the second level right away, and has an opportunity to grow into a much larger role. If he's going to impact, 2 phases of the game immediately, then it's hard to be upset with that pick.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of special teams, and Jamie, I got you here. Let's talk about the 4th round pick. The other wide receiver at TCU, Darius Davis.
So to me, I heard a lot of people complaining about the Davis pick because they thought he was a 6th or 7th round pick, and saying, it's too early. It's too early. But here's my thought process on Davis. Number one, this has been a historically slow wide receiver room, and Davis is quite literally a world-class sprinter. He is pretty much always going to be the fastest guy on the field when he catches the football. Mm-hmm. You don't see a whole lot of guys that run as explosively as he does, simply put. He is really good with the ball in his hands. He has good vision. He's able to just flat out outrun pursuit angles all over the place. He's not a guy who makes people miss a whole lot in the open field, but man, once he gets going, good luck catching him. If you don't get him down on the first 5 yards, he's at full speed and he's gone. And that goes for kick returns, that goes for punt returns, that goes for wide receiver screens, slants, and I'm sure they're going to be able to access the deep part of the field with him too, in certain looks. So is he a crisp route runner? I don't know that he's an NFL level route runner right now, but he doesn't really have to be. They can use him in the gadget game. They can use him on the jet sweeps, on the reverses, on the wide receiver screens, a whole variety. Drafting Davis should completely open up the wide receiver screen part of the playbook, which is something they really haven't been able to go to because they just didn't have an option for it in recent years. Will Davis be on the field a whole lot as a wide receiver year one? Probably not. He's probably going to have a pretty limited playbook, but he is going to breathe all kinds of life into the special teams. He is a guy who has a really good chance to flip field position for them on a weekly basis in a pretty meaningful way. And not only flip field position, but score points on punts and kicks, which is something they've struggled to do for most of the last forever. So for me, I think this pick made sense whether he plays a lot of wide receiver in year one or not, because he's going to have such a huge impact on special teams. And this is a guy who is just a freak athlete. Not only is he fast, but what did you say, Craig? He benched or he squatted 575 pounds or something like that.
Yeah, the numbers on the lifts are pretty crazy. So 550-pound squat, 375-pound bench, and a 350-pound hang clean at 5'8", 165 pounds.
So he's a freak, and he's a walking jacked up, juiced up muscle, basically. So I kind of think maybe we see him as a gunner, a guy with his speed and his kind of power, teach him to tackle. Now he's not just affecting field position for the offense, but he's affecting field position for the defense, which helps the offense. Mm-hmm. So scoring points on special teams, affecting field position on special teams. If he catches a handful of wide receiver screens and turns them into big plays this year, maybe catches one or two deep balls, I mean, this pick is golden. Mm-hmm. And he's going to develop as a wide receiver and as a route runner over time. I love this pick. 4th round, 5th round, 7th round, it doesn't matter. Sign me up. I think immediate impact is immediate impact, whether it's on offense or special teams. And this group needs immediate impact on special teams. So just as a returner, it's gold. And if he winds up as any kind of an influence on offense and or a gunner, it's a home run pick in the 4th round. So I have no problem with it. I see the vision. I see the plan. I think it's going to work out. I think he's going to be hugely valuable for them and could be a Pro Bowl returner within a couple of years, if not year one. So no issues with this pick at all. I really like it. I think he adds so many things that they need. It's going to be huge for them. Yeah,
huge. And of course, Craig's the one who brings up the lifts and squats. Of course, he's the one paying attention to that. Craig, talk to us about Davis.
Yeah, I'm a sicko. Sorry. So it's weird how this works out, right? Because initially when the pick's made, it's jarring because you don't quite understand it. And we were all kind of a little emotional about it because it's another one of those scenarios where you see guys on the board and you're like, well, why him there? Yeah. And then after you have a time, to step away from it, kind of analyze things and put it into perspective. This is a Ryan Ficken pick. And the Chargers have a new kind of they understand the third phase of the game, and they put an emphasis on it here in the last couple of years. And Ficken is going to be like your primary guy there that's pushing or forcing the issue here. This lines up exactly with what he would want. Like, go look at some of the returners he's had in the past. The Chargers haven't had one of those guys. Like, this is another Jet Award winner. Now, I believe this one's going to work out better than the last one, who barely saw the field at all and for some reason could not get on the field to return kicks or punts. Sorry, Joe Reed, rest in peace in Chicago. But this lines up perfectly because you have to get someone that can affect the game and help you in the field possession battle. And all of this, again, if we're talking about helping Justin Herbert, plays into that as well. Shorter fields to work with, less work for him to do. And then also you're talking about someone who can get you some cheap points. Being able to threaten teams and getting easy turnaround points on punts or kickoffs is probably one of the most demoralizing things on the football field because literally takes almost no time off of the clock and you can put someone in a hole really quickly. As far as what he does on the field, he does not play around in the return game. If he finds a crease, he floors it into daylight and good luck. Again, if you don't get hands on him at all, like before he kicks it into high gear, and the acceleration is also very good. Some guys are fast, but they have build-up speed, like say a Guyton. No, this kid's quick and almost at top speed after about his 4th or 5th step. So if he's got any room, any sort of halo after he catches the ball at all and he sees daylight, it's probably going to be a big return. He has all the tools to be a menace as a downfield threat that opens up the short and intermediate game for possession and run after catch guys. So you kind of see a theme here. They're picking people, and not just on the special team side of things, they're selecting players that complement other players on the roster. So it's like they're figuring team building thing out, and you're seeing it happen after you kind of take a step back and analyze the picks for what they are. Again, Jamie already said it, and had me speak to it. He's freakishly strong for a person of his size, like freakishly strong. We all know like who Austin Eckler is, and he's like the pound for pound guy. Well, this is what Darius Davis was at TCU, but in a smaller package. He also flashed a little bit of run after the catch ability through contact, and that kind of speaks to that strength as well. So, I mean, you're not going to see him pinballing off of guys left and right or dragging guys for 5-10 yards after the catch. But I did see him break a couple of tackles for an extra 3 to 4 yards after contact on tape. So, it was really encouraging. He was deployed as more of a gadget guy, even in college. So, you didn't see him run a ton of routes on the tree. I think I maybe saw 4. And of course, the size is kind of going to be a little bit of an issue. So you're going to have to manufacture touches with him, and you want to get him into space and out of crowds. He's not as agile of a guy as you would think he is. And I think some of that has to do with, like Jamie says, he's a muscled up little dude. So, he's kind of tight, but he has enough wiggle to make the first guy miss, and that's kind of sort of all he needs, because once he's beyond the first person, if there's any space, then he's building up the top speed and he's off to the races. He's not going to provide you much in the way of positional versatility, although TCU did use him out of the backfield a few times. So you could probably deploy him in that way and create mismatches with like linebackers and edge guys who have to man him up. So again, this pick, now that you're looking back at it, is perfectly fine where it was, because he offers you more than just one single thing, but the thing that he's best at is something that your team sorely needed. So they identified a need and they went and got arguably the best guy to fill it. So when you look at it that way, I mean, hell, there's a lot of value in that pick. And I think sometimes what you have to do is step away from just pigeonholing someone and thinking about a specific need and looking at the player that they selected and how he may fill multiple needs, and then reassessing what the value of the pick actually was.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about the gunner thing that Jamie mentioned, because he was recruited as a cornerback, so really used to tackling, but with that speed, I mean, that is deadly as a gunner on special teams. Not only is he a returner, kick and punt returner, but as a gunner too, he could really contribute on special teams right away. But we talked about him being a track star already, but he literally in high school won the state title in the 200-meter dash. So he is world-class speed, and TCU employed him as a playmaker on offense, used that speed as a returner. He had 5 punt return touchdowns, 1 kick return touchdown in his career. That Jet Award winner that Craig mentioned, that's the most electrifying player in college football. And Darius Davis got that last year. As a return man, averaged 14.9 yards per punt return, which was 4th best in the country, and then 20 yards per kick return. It was 20.4. He had 268 yards on punt returns, which was 3rd best in the nation last year on only 18 attempts. So he was getting a ton of yards. He led the FBS with 2 punt return touchdowns last year. On kick returns, he was 2nd in the country in total return yards with 840. Davis is the TCU's all-time leader with 5 punt return scores, tied the team record with 6 total return touchdowns. This isn't just a punt returner. This is a accomplished punt returner. As a receiver, they played him out of the slot at times. TCU just got him the ball, whether it was handing it to him or on the screen game. He showed nice hands. We saw some vision acceleration that he displayed in the return game when he got the ball in his hands as a receiver to hit the hole and just kind of take off with it. He's got really good footwork. He didn't really run many routes at TCU, but, I think there might be some untapped value there because TCU just didn't let him run all that many routes. The concerns for me is we talked about the size, but the wingspan is only 5'9". That's going to be the smallest in the NFL next season. That'll be the smallest wingspan among all wide receivers. He didn't run a lot of routes outside of like 5 yards. And when he needs to, it's the short arms that are going to be an issue unless he consistently can separate, which isn't something he's really had experience with. Not something he can't do, but with that wingspan, if he's manned up and pressed at the line of scrimmage and doesn't get that separation, he's not going to be able to get out there and make a lot of catches. So he's also very short and slender, 5'8", 165, which is pretty tiny for a wide receiver to play out there consistently. But again, his route tree was basically a plus sign. You saw him just on go routes straight down the sideline and then quick hitters scraping the line of scrimmage. But the agility numbers indicate that there might not be a lot of bend or cut ability as a route runner. It's just that otherworldly kind of cut and go straight line type of speed. But for me, I mean, I like this pick a lot. He's a returner right away, gadget piece for the Chargers offense. They could probably ease Davis in, give him some bubble screens, some jet sweeps like TCU ran to kind of get him comfortable in the offense. Hopefully he adds a spark with that speed. You know, they drafted the most accomplished and explosive return man in the draft. He has dangerous speed. It's what they needed to add. And the question is, can Darius Davis take a leap in that route running to kind of be a viable threat as a receiver instead of just a gadget guy in terms of his long-term plan for the Chargers?
See, I don't think he necessarily needs to become a great route runner to be effective in this offense. I think by adding QJ and adding Davis, let's assume one of Mike or Keenan are not here next year in 2024. Let's say Mike is gone. Why not run more condensed packages? Have Keenan at the head of a trips formation or a bunch formation, have Davis and have QJ kind of hidden behind him to give them bigger cushions. Send QJ deep, send Keenan to the deep intermediate, and just run a drag with Davis. Clear it out, make a linebacker cover him the width of the field, and just let him run. I don't know that he necessarily has to be a route runner. I think you can find ways with stack formations, with bunch formations, trip formations, not necessarily spreading teams out, but creating some natural picks, some natural screens, and just giving him an advantage off the line of scrimmage, giving him 2 steps. That's all he really needs, and see what he can do with the ball in his hands after the catch.
But what I'm saying is, and while that all works out, I'm talking about consistently having him on the field as a wide receiver 3. You can't bunch and stack the entire time. That's going to be great, and implementing him in that way will definitely be successful, I think. But I think if you're talking about if, say, Mike Williams in this hypothetical is not here next year, and you got Keenan and QJ, if Darius Davis is that wide receiver 3, can he consistently separate at his size is my question going forward.
Remains to be seen.
Yeah, of course. And I just feel like if he can improve that route running, he's worlds better because he can separate and get that, yard or 2 he needs with that short wingspan and that, smaller stature.
Yeah, I think I'm right now. I mean, it could always develop, but I see him like his ceiling is a wide receiver 4. I don't see him being a full-time slot guy taking a bunch of offensive reps. Like the way I look at him right now, he's a returner with wide receiver value that you can plug in to manufacture some touches in space. And if you need a spark, you want to get the ball in his hands. So again, you're still thinking about like the roster and who may not be around. If one of the guys leaves, then he gets elevated to wide receiver 4. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with Guyton, but then Palmer is still your wide receiver 3. And then you could have Davis as a 4, like at best case, as far as like, how often he sees the field. I think that would be kind of his apex offensively.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just talking about long-term if they did view him as a, an outside starter. But I think wide receiver 4 and full-time returner is probably the goal here. And by the way, just going off the theme here, the games that they loved and fell in love with him, 2021, Kansas, 100 yards receiving. He had like 50 yards on the ground, took one to the house. It was easy, dynamic player, took over that game almost by himself. All right. So, I was going to move on to the next pick, but so at the top of day 3, which is round 4, the Chargers liked a group of corners. They liked Clark Phillips, the Utah corner. They liked Jacorian Bennett, who's a guy we mentioned, and Keely Ringo. And they were all taken before the Chargers picked. The Chargers really needed some speed needed a returner in day 3, and they felt there were few guys like Darius Davis left in the draft, so they took him, checked that box. I asked about, a lot of people have him ranked a lot later. Like Jamie mentioned, we drafted him in the 7th round, so obviously we like the skill set there. But a lot of people had him drafted or picked later was his kind of his spot there. And they said in the 4th they wanted to find a starter, and they didn't have any starter holes to fill. For the first 3 days, they got their edge 3, they got their wide receiver 3, they got a linebacker 3, 2-3, and they got Davis to fill that starting returner spot right away. And they thought, the value of the guys as returners of wide receivers and corners after Davis was very underwhelming in their opinion. And looking at this class, that is absolutely true. I feel like there's Darius Davis as the top best return man in this draft. And then there was a second tier of guys that could probably pitch in. And then there was just everybody else. And so they picked the best returner in this draft, and they got him in the 4th round. So hard to argue with that too.
Yeah, I think it was a good pick. Getting somebody who's going to return kicks and punts, and anything he does on offense is gravy. So.
Yeah, that's just added bonus for sure. All right, so let's move on to round 5. Craig, let's talk about the Clemson offensive lineman, Jordan McFadden.
Yeah, so how can you not look at this pick and immediately not feel the Jamari Sawyer vibes?
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at just from a size profile, he's on the lighter side, but a shorter, squattier guy. So 6'2", 295, but he's got some pretty long arms at 34 inches. So he can handle himself on the outside from a length perspective. I know that, you're looking at someone that profile's shorter and a little bit lighter, and you think that, edge guys are going to eat him up, but he actually held up pretty good against speed. Honestly, I think that's what he blocks best. He struggles a little bit against power, but he has position flexibility to play all along the offensive line. Again, the arms are long enough to where he can line up on the outside if you need to in a pinch. And honestly, you could argue that, with a little bit more development and the fact that he held up so well out there at Clemson against some really good edge rushers, he may be able to be plugged in at right tackle at some point. I know that they more than likely want to play him on the inside, but you could do worse than sticking him out at right tackle. He's got really solid footwork, and that lends to his ability to match up well against speed rushers. So he's got the length and the solid footwork. He's got really solid. He's a really solid run blocker, and he's got some sound fundamentals in the run game as well. Kind of redundant here. He's probably better against speed than he is against power, again, because of his lighter frame. So he can get muscled up if he doesn't have like near flawless technique against larger defensive linemen. So the bigger edge guys, bigger interior defensive linemen can body him up a little bit. And he's got some semi-questionable grip strength. He doesn't sustain blocks as well as he should. So I think that's a hands thing. Of course, people complain about holding, but as an offensive lineman, you do it all the time. And it's really hard to be successful if you can't get your hands on the inside guys' chest plates and hold that and steer them. So there's got to be some improvement there. And he's an older prospect. I believe he turns 24 this year. And you're noticing that about a lot of kids in the draft this year. Of course, you have some crossover from the COVID stuff, so you got the extra years of eligibility. So you're seeing a little bit of older class. I think he can come in and be like swing guard or tackle, who could actually climb into like a number 2 role on the depth chart somewhere because of his production and the fact that he's got some pretty decent technique right now, but also in the event, let's say, for instance, Pipkins doesn't work out after this year, he kind of has a little bit of a decline. Well, now you can kind of play a little bit of a game on the inside. You got Sawyer, who's proven he can play tackle. He'd probably be a better right tackle than he was left. So you've got that option. And McFadden can kick inside. Or if McFadden proves that he can hold his own on the outside, he did it at a high level at, a kind of a blue blood school, then maybe give him that opportunity. So you, again, looking at the team building aspect of things, you see the Chargers getting much better at addressing positions of need and building quality depth, and particularly now on the offensive line, which is something outside of speedier, twitchier guys that we've been screaming for now for years. So there's an opportunity for him to come in. Of course, we don't want him to see the field any sooner than he has to for development purposes, but you could do a lot worse. In fact, they have in the past. So I feel okay with McFadden if he had to see significant snaps just based off of what I saw from him on film. I mean, I wouldn't expect it to be perfect, but he's one of those guys that feels a lot like Sawyer. Like he could get in and come in and not be a complete liability. So again, probably they're aiming for him to play guard, but there's more than likely going to be at some point some opportunity for them to consider him at a tackle that plays some significant snaps there.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about his athleticism yet, because this is a pretty athletic kid here. Played 39 starts, both left and right tackle, was a team captain, and recorded the third most snaps of any O-lineman in the history of the Clemson program, which is pretty impressive. Footwork is really clean. He's pretty quick out of his kick step, can get out and run to pick off defenders at the second level, which I loved. Good frame, big barrel chest, strong hands. Also plays with a high motor. Saw him kind of continuing his blocks throughout the whistle. I know a lot of people care about this, but he trained with Duke Manyweather this offseason. Of course, he's a big fan of him. Thinks he can be a versatile player. Now, like Craig mentioned, a little bit undersized for a tackle at 6'2", 303, but ran a 4.99, which is excellent at his size. Because he's undersized, he's quick to engage and punch, but can get outworked the longer reps kind of last, and you can see him get overpowered by bigger defensive tackles. He's got the athleticism, he's got the length, he's got the technique to run wide away. He's got the play strength and size. The size kind of hurts him a little bit, but this is a guy that really, in my mind, can play any spot. I would not count him out as a tackle. And I was thinking a little bit outside the box while watching him. I would not mind him getting some reps at center. While he's small for a tackle, it makes a lot of sense in the middle with his length, his technique, use that athleticism. He was a captain, use that football IQ in the middle. I think that could really be a good spot for him down the road if they wanted to, as kind of a pitch in, center depth. I think it could make some sense. But either way, this is a really, really nice developmental pick. Let's get Jazz for a 5th and 6th round pick here, because this is awesome, this back-to-back, and we'll get to that. But don't count him out as a tackle. I think really he'll probably compete in the swing tackle spot. He'll compete in the guard spots. I'd like to see if maybe he could pitch it at center. That's just kind of a thinking outside the box move there. But I think, quite honestly, he could play any spot on the line. This is a versatile piece with the athleticism that, quite honestly, is pretty nice when you watch him on tape.
Yeah, so I think, we talked about this being kind of a traits-driven draft, and I think McFadden's a really good example of that, honestly. He's you guys mentioned it. He has the feet. Footwork is really good. There are times when he can stop his feet at the top of a rush and get beat late in the rep, but overall he is able to slide and mirror extremely well. You can tell he's got good core strength because his balance is outstanding, and guys will hit him with spin moves and he'll just catch them and stuff them. You really never see him out of position, very rarely. He can struggle with power. Guys that convert speed to power can give him issues. I think I watched 6 of his games, and I really only saw one edge rusher give him issues, and it was Jared Verse from Florida State, and Jared Verse kind of ate him up. Really gave him issues with speed and bend off the edge. He used a move that I've never seen anybody use before. Not even sure where it came from, but it looked like something out of the Matrix, where he speed rushed McFadden, waited for McFadden to bring his hands up to punch. He hit the brakes, almost like pulled like an air brake, like in Top Gun, went backwards to avoid the punch, and then ran right around him. I've never seen anything like it. But Verse was the only guy that really gave him true fits. So you like the athleticism, you like the feet, you like the technique. I think the hands are pretty strong. And the length, despite what almost every write-up I read about him says, like the guys say, he's got 34-inch long arms.
Mm-hmm.
He's plenty long enough to play tackle.
Yep.
I think the big thing for him is he can carry his hands kind of low, and he can be a little bit late to punch, which winds up getting him high and outside at times, which I think contributes to some of the grip strength issues where his hands kind of slide off the pads. I think if he can time his hands up better and get his hands inside early, he might have a better luck latching on and sustaining those blocks where his hands aren't sliding off. I'm sure he can play guard at this level. I mean, I would just train him at all 5 positions and see how he handles them. Just move him up and down the line in camp, have him take reps everywhere, see how he handles it. I could definitely see him playing right tackle. I think swing tackle early is a definite possibility. If Pipkins doesn't work, have him move out to right tackle. I mean, the Salyer comparison is great from a standpoint of longtime starter. He played on both sides of the line, highly productive, durable, reliable, fell down the board some. I mean, this is a guy you feel like you could have taken in the 3rd or 4th round and felt pretty good about just because of all the production and the stability and the traits. The big difference between McFadden and Salyer is McFadden is a much better athlete than Salyer is.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that translates to playing pretty much anywhere on the line that they want to play him. So to have that kind of versatility and athleticism is awesome. The length, the feet, everything is great. Just some minor cleanup things, and they've got an opportunity to maybe have a guy who can contribute either at a guard position, at center, or at tackle, depending on what they need. And he certainly is a guy you can throw out there, on a one-off basis in a pinch and not feel too worried about how he's going to perform.
No, he's got the experience that you wouldn't have to worry about him at all. No. Yeah, and that length thing is just wrong. He meets that threshold and he's good enough. He might be a little light and a little short, but other than that, he's got it all going for him. And yeah, if they would have picked him in the 4th round, now I didn't watch him during the process. I don't think any of us did. But
no, while
rewatching him, I would not have complained about taking him a round earlier at all. So, so when they picked him, he was a guy that the Chargers loved at the East-West Shrine Bowl. They loved their kind of productive tackles from bigger schools with traits they can convert to guard, maybe even play out at tackle. They think he is excellent depth right away and has starter potential, and they're going to get him guard and tackle work right when he gets in camp. It's basically let's cross-train him across that line and figure it out once we get into camp. They didn't mention center, but I would love to see him get some reps there. But I think get him in and kind of figure it out. Kind of like what they did with Salyer. His kind of projection got sped up because of the Slater injury, but with McFadden and the experience and the athleticism, you just don't worry about him. You could see him coming in if any of the guards go down or a tackle, bringing him in. I wouldn't worry about him at all. I'm a big fan of this pick here in the 5th. So let's move on to the 6th, which is another guy I was a lot more excited about while watching, and it's the interior defensive lineman Scott Matlock out of Boise State. So just the backstory, if anybody doesn't know, his father passed away before he got into high school. He lived in foster care most of his life, eventually moved to Idaho, where he began to really focus on football. Fast forward to 2022, he landed as the captain of Boise State. Everybody loves him in that locker room. Everybody loves him in that town. Nobody had a bad thing to say about him. Nothing but glowing reviews for this kid. In high school, he played tight end, offensive line, and defensive line. In 19 is where he kind of made that full-time switch to defensive line. Of course, as the highlights, as everybody's seen going into this pick, he was a goal line receiver, caught a touchdown last year and this year. And he wasn't a combine invite, but while crunching the numbers and just looking at it, his pro day was absolutely stellar. He had 29 Craig, pay attention. Here we go. Here's some workout numbers. 29 reps on the bench press, ran a 4.98, 9'5" broad jump, 9.393 cone, all elite for a defensive tackle. That would have made him, if he went to the combine and comparing those numbers to the guys that did test the combine, he would have had the best 3-cone and shuttle, would have been tied for second with the best 40, would have been third among all combine invites in broad jump and bench, and would have had the 5th best vert. That's how impressive he was on his pro day. So obviously, good athlete. We know all about it. He's really good on the inside. He wins with leverage to cut inside of blockers. He sets it up with a really quick get off of the line, engages with active hands, a really good push-pull move that I liked, and a really good swim move inside too. Technique is there. He stays square in the run game. He's being able to leverage linemen. He showed that he can be productive too. He averaged over 40 tackles. He got over 6 sacks the last 2 seasons. Has some pass rushing upside while getting it done in the run game. Also brings some really nice special teams value as well, as we've kind of hit on a lot of these special teams guys. Blocks 3 blocks in fab ever. That I'm so glad I got that word
3
out.
cocks.
Now here's the thing. I cut off before I finished that word. You said the full word. Fab will make sure that he edits that, and you'll be gift tomorrow, Jamie. Thank you. He
Give it up, Fab.
3 kicks in college, which is awesome. Now, in terms of the size, a little light for an interior defensive lineman. He is 6'4", 296, but he does look like a guy that could add a little bit more muscle to hang inside if he wanted to. So early on, pass rushing depth on passing downs in the D line, can play special teams on the field goal unit. Honestly, while watching this, Bosa Mack on the outside, having guys like Tuli, SJD, Matlock, even Fox inside to get after the quarterback, that's a party. I love the matchup of these guys that have some pass rushing upside inside, getting Mack and Bosa on the outside. You want a third down passing down and getting some of these guys inside. I love the possibility of some of these guys inside. And Matlock adding to that group with the pass rushing skill set he's already got. I was very impressed with this kid. I am huge on how he's going to be, and really feels like a steal here in the 6th round.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't expecting much when I watched the tape, and it was really fun tape. You mentioned a lot of it. The hands are really strong. He punches really well. He's great off the line of scrimmage. Very quick first step. Love the inside swim move. Push pull is really good. I think I saw a little bit of a rip. Saw a spin, which I think has some potential. He got 7.5 sacks in 2021, mostly playing inside, playing a lot of 0, 1, and 3 technique. They moved him out to the edge more. He was playing a lot of 5 and 6 technique in 2022, even standing up on the edge at times, and wasn't as effective because they didn't play him in his best spot. I think he had those sacks, and they were like, well, let's move him on the edge. And that's just not what he is. Now, that's not to say he can't have some success on the edge. He's 308 pounds, and he actually bends pretty well. And I saw him flatten the edge a couple times. So there is some potential on the edge. I just don't think it's his highest and best use. I think you're looking at a 3 technique, a 4-eye, a 5 technique, an interior lineman who can get to the quarterback by accessing the inside gaps with that swim move, with that push pull. I really think there's a lot of upside there. And he could be the Morgan Fox replacement, just a more kind of naturally sized defensive tackle who can get to the quarterback. Not as good. I didn't think he was as good against the run, but definitely a high motor, high effort pass rusher with some solid technique and the opportunity to develop the hands and the counters and be even better.
This is, first of all, let me say this. I want to give props to the scouting department because they found some guys that I heard nothing about and had no interest in. Like sometimes I was going through some of the lists with some of the top names and even looking towards the back end of some of the guys who are ranked in like the 2s and 300s. And there were names like Scott Matlocks who never popped up. So kudos to them for finding these cats because this is one of my favorite picks. Just based off what I saw, I'm just going to call him what he is. He's a disruptor. And he's got really, really good athleticism for his size. Garrett already spoke to the numbers. But he also displays some really decent hand usage when he's attacking upfield as like a 4-eye penetrator. And one of the other things I really liked about him is he manipulates guards and tackles on stunts as a looper. I can't remember what game it was, but he ran a stunt where he engaged the tackle to make it look as if he wasn't going to shoot through the gap. And it opened up the gap wider because the guard, instead of going to double team him, immediately turned to go towards the end, and it opened a wider gap. And he immediately disengages with the tackle and loops in for a sack. And it's funny because he set it up by playing coy. He essentially didn't have to win with the athleticism. He outsmarted two people and still was able to make the sack. So you got somebody with the athletic profile and also the mind for the game. So you can really build off of that. And I think he has a frame that hasn't been completely maxed out. I think you can add a few more pounds to him. And if you want to play him, on the inside a little bit more, and I think he's going to be an interior defensive line guy, like Jamie alluded to. I see him more as 3 tech in a 4-eye 5 tech role. In a solid rotation there, but initially he's going to be somebody you can deploy on the field as an interior disruptor in the passing game. And yeah, you can put him in tandem with your edge guys and just kind of mix and match him on the inside with some of the guys that you already have there, some of your bigger guys. If you want to get just a little bit more variety on earlier downs, he'll be able to give you a little bit of that as well. I think he understands leverage really well. And he plays with the low man mentality, which helps to compensate for his less than ideal play strength. Right now, I feel like dude probably really needs to hit the squat rack. And I know all these lifting cliches and stuff are popping up, but I don't care. Screw y'all. He's got to build up his lower body strength, man, because he can be uprooted against power blocking schemes. So that's something that definitely has to be worked on. I don't think it's going to be a long-term issue for him because he's going to gain the weight, the strength, and the mass there. And I also feel like just based on the way he moves, it won't take away that much from his athleticism on the interior, because right now he's just a really quick guy for his size. And I don't see him losing much of that, particularly when you look at his athleticism and his 10-yard and 20-yard splits. That's not going to, that's where he's best and most explosive. And he's also freaking usually when you say something about somebody being really high effort, it's kind of a knock on him, but he's pretty relentless, especially when he's pursuing from the backside as well. But just starting off, I think you can get some real use out of him even in year one. Is just someone who screws up blocking schemes as a penetrator on obvious passing downs. Another thing he needs to work on is learning how to be more fluid in stringing his counters together. He could win a lot earlier in reps if he went into the rep with a plan B in his mind already, just kind of more of a pass rushing plan, because it seems like he comes out looking for that initial move to work. And if it doesn't, he thinks his way through it and he can win later in the rep. But I think he'd be much more effective as a pass rusher if he went in with a little bit better plan for, in the event that his first move doesn't work out. So again, I liked him a ton. And I think Daniel Jeremiah had him ranked in his top 150, which is the only person I saw say anything about him at all.
I hadn't heard of Scott Matlock or McFadden, and I loved both of them together. I, like Jamie did with Tuli, I went back and graded Matlock. He was a low 4th round grade for me. I wouldn't have complained about him going a round or two earlier in my mind. And that I'm here to steal grown man's jobs is one of the coldest lines from a draft pick I've heard in years. This man is an animal. Another personality I absolutely love. So go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh, I was just going to say, we've had a lot of conversations in the Discord about the defensive line types that Staley likes. And one of the types that's come up quite a bit is the length and strength guy. And I feel like Matlock is kind of that guy, kind of a length and strength guy. He's kind of what they wanted Tillery to be, but he's better at it than Tillery was. And they got him in the 6th round.
5 rounds later.
So I think this has a chance to be a really, really solid pick for them. Almost like a home run pick for them if they can develop his hands and his counters. It's going to be fun. They've done a really good job of sprinkling in defensive line depth the last 2 years late in the draft in preparation for when guys like Austin Johnson and SJD aren't on the team anymore. And I mean, it's got to be Staley influence, because this is preparing for life after your starters 2 or 3 years before they're no longer your starters is not a path that they've normally taken, but they've gone out of their way to do that in the last 2 years. And I think it really speaks to how much more prepared they've been since Staley's been here, just from a process standpoint and how they're looking at the roster.
Yeah.
Think about how this works from just even a cap standpoint. You go in and you sign some higher level players on some shorter term deals, and behind that you bring in some guys that can contribute early and grow over the course of those shorter term contracts. So when you don't bring the older guys back because they've either aged themselves out, contracts are up, or they get too expensive, you got quality players to plug in. It's team building. And this is literally, like, it blows my mind actually going back and looking at these picks all over again. I mean, without saying too much, because we'll get to it, I like this draft significantly better than I did after the first 3 days. They've done a really great job with finding quality depth, not just bodies, but dudes who can physically come in and play, and will maybe, more than likely, almost all of them, we'll get to the other one soon, that can come in year one and actually play. And you don't have a bunch of early round draft picks, and in this case you got late round dudes who are probably going to see the field, and a good bit of it, in year one.
Yeah, so the Chargers saw Scott Matlock at the Shrine Bowl again, another Shrine Bowl darling. They were heavily represented there. They wanted to get more athletic up front. They think Matlock can get upfield, be productive as a rotational guy, and what they really value, here we go again, Matlock's special team contributions right away. So it doesn't have to be a starter right away, but we'll be in on the field goal units, maybe get his hands on some footballs, block some clocks, and contribute on special teams. So, Jamie, there's no way to end this better than for you to start us off here on the very last pick of the Chargers.
Fuck you.
23 draft. Jamie, send us home. Max Duggan, QB.
No.
TCU.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to. It's a free country. I don't want to. I'm not going to. No. Believe it or not,
going home.
Believe it or not, Max Duggan, Davey O'Brien Award winner, Heisman runner-up, and he won another award for the best quarterback in the nation. I can't remember which one it was. How the hell did this guy win so many top quarterback in the nation awards?
Dude, let me tell you. Let me tell you a quick story. I tweeted something out after the 7th round pick. Like, I can't believe this is the way they're going to end this draft. If you could guess the number of people that told me his accolades after that, would you guess that it was over 15? Because it was 22 different people telling me that about his accolades, the Heisman runner-up, not anything about his game, but the accolades, Jamie.
Probably all Horned Frog fans.
Are they also fans of Tom Telesco?
Probably all TCU fans.
Yeah.
Is my guess.
So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Am I supposed to say something nice here?
Yeah, look, Duggan's flexing on you here, Jamie. Look at those arms. Those chicken wings he's got going there.
I mean, look, it's a 7th round pick, right? It's kind of a throwaway pick. Does it really matter who you pick in the 7th round? I guess.
Yes. But go ahead.
I guess, big picture, and you're going to get to the context here in a minute, but if he can provide competition at quarterback too, maybe convince them not to carry 3 quarterbacks, then it's a win. But I think in terms of what he does on the field, there's just a lot of bad. There's a lot of things that need to be worked on here. And for a draft that was so focused on traits, to wind up in the 7th round with a quarterback who doesn't really have any quantifiable physical traits
Is
at the NFL level.
Is attitude and leadership a trait?
That's why I said quantifiable physical traits. He literally does not have a single physical trait you can look at and say that's going to carry him in the NFL. Well, okay, his speed, his athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it. He moves really well. He doesn't really see or feel the pocket particularly well. He doesn't have a great sense for when the pass rush is coming. He takes a lot of bad sacks. But if he gets through one or two reads and nothing's there and there's a hole, he's capable of exploiting that hole. And I think he's a lot faster than what defenses expect him to be. And you get longer runs than you probably should with him just outrunning lazy pursuit angles. In terms of passing, there's not a whole lot to lean on here. I think the arm strength is pretty below average, and it's made worse by really bad footwork. The ball consistently comes out late. He'll force the ball into tight windows. It'll flutter. You almost see him either falling back on his back foot or jumping to get extra on deep throws, which, I mean, 9 times out of 10, if Max Duggan is throwing a deep ball in SoFi, you've got a better chance of that ball hitting the roof than you do of it getting to where it's supposed to be with the wide receiver. That is how high his deep balls are. He doesn't just throw with touch. He is throwing moon balls. I didn't see a whole lot of ability to drive the ball into tight windows, either on the boundary or in the middle of the field. He puts his wide receivers at risk constantly. I mean, QJ and Davis had to be thrilled to be drafted away from him. And then when the Chargers took him, all I could see was that gif of Michael Corleone in Godfather 3. I thought I was out and they pulled me back in. Like, I feel bad for them. So yeah, I don't see a whole lot of physical traits you can lean on outside of the speed. I know he's a great leader. I know they love the personality. He showed a lot of mental toughness and fortitude. He lost his starting job after 3 years, wound up getting it back when somebody got hurt and never relinquished it and led them to the national title game. So there's some character things there that you like. He's that kind of kid. He's like the Andrew Gashkars, or now I'm blanking on that linebacker's name.
Bront Bird.
No.
Oh.
I know he's
the white kid. The special team star, the white kid from like
Nick Zubnar.
Zubnar, yeah, that's it. Yeah. He's the quarterback version of Nick Zubnar. He is the plucky, hardworking, scrappy. He's going to be the first one in, the last one to leave. Coaches are going to fall in love with him, but he's just not very good.
Mm-hmm. And let me tell you why. I talked to Anthony North this week. We did a podcast on him, and he told me, which I didn't know, but Max Duggan's dad is a big-time high school coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so he played for him. And of course, he's a player guy, a coach guy. They all rave about him. Not only did he lose his job and bring it back, but what I read over and over again was he had a broken foot and a torn tendon in 2021, and he played through it. And teammates can't shut up about it. So it's a big deal. And, the accolades on paper, got TCU to a national championship. He was a leader. He led the locker room. He led the team. That's all what everybody's hanging their hat on. If we're talking about positives, I think, quite honestly, while watching more of Max Duggan than I wanted to, best with the quick hitters underneath. When he can get the ball out quick, short game, he can be sharp. The athleticism, like Jamie mentioned, he is a fearless scrambler, by the way, trying to gain every extra inch he can as a runner. He'll need to learn how to slide before taking a hit, but he is not a scared runner. In the pocket, he will hang tough. Sometimes he'll stay in the pocket too long, but he tries not to panic and take off. But when he does, he can hit a hole and get some extra yards. Having that tie with the other two wide receivers from TCU is good. The accuracy is just the biggest issue here. He finished the year with 63.7% completion percentage. That is 46th in the nation among QBs. His short routes are fine. When it's middle to deep part of the field, it is an absolute adventure whenever Max Duggan is letting that ball go. There's ugly misses. Jamie talked about it hitting the roof. It feels to me like he's playing 3 flies up back when we did in the playground. Throw it as high and far to the middle of the crowd as you can, so you can come down with it. That's Max Duggan's play. Dax Muggin. What am I doing today? Max Duggan's.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but that's his plan of attack when he lets it go. But obviously, they love that he's a competitor. He's mobile. He's going to struggle downfield and his overall accuracy, but he's going to compete with the Easton Stick at QB2. It'll help acclimate Quentin Johnston and Darius Davis, hopefully, within the NFL with his familiarity. So in that respect, it's okay. It's hard to really get worked up about 7th-round pick. Jamie didn't mention what he was calling him all during the draft process. But obviously, we weren't a fan of him while watching QJ and all these other receivers. So Max Duggan, obviously, the personality you love, and hopefully it can help these TCU wide receivers transition a little bit better into the NFL.
Well, we went from a lot of sugar straight to shit. This is crazy. First of all, I like Dax Muggin better, so that's what I'll be calling him.
All right, cool.
Forward. Much better name. And Easton Stick, man, they might be trying to get you out of the paint, dude. I will never cheer for Easton Stick, or I never have, more than I will this upcoming season. I don't need this to happen. Okay. I know that we complained about the 3 QB thing, but I just don't want this to work. With every fiber of my being, I want no parts of this. And I don't know how many of you guys out there have watched some of the, I guess, the playback of the stuff that was behind the scenes during the draft. Like when they were interviewing players, talking to them, you can see, like, I think they showed like the calls that went through to each player. So when QJ, there were 2 different shows. I can't remember what they were. It's like they were throwing shade unintentionally at Duggan because QJ's agent said, it's okay, we want to go to a team with a good quarterback. And that was unintentional. It was kind of lightweight, so I didn't think much of it. But then they started asking QJ about what he thought about going to the Chargers. And one of the things that he kept emphasizing was that they have great quarterback play. And it's like, man, Max is catching some strays. But yeah, they thought that they were getting away from him. And then they just got the rug pulled from under him, man. That's like, this is so dirty. Like, I'm a 1st-round draft pick. Yay, my dreams just came true. And I get away from this jerk off. No, he's coming with you. It's like, you know, it's like a hitchhiker. It's like you drop them off. They're really weird. You were nice enough to give them a ride. And somehow they end up at the same gas station as you, like 15 miles down the road. And I don't know. It's anyway.
Yeah.
Enough of rambling. So as far as Duggan is concerned, really good athlete, but really bad at the quarterbacking thing, which, you know, doesn't really work out.
His job.
Yeah. That's kind of important.
So kind of a dual threat, I guess. So defenses kind of have to like account for his ability to run when things break down. Garrett, you mentioned it. Experience in the quick game is like a plus. So he has a really good feel for like the RPO section of the playbook. Awesome. Also came up clutch in some big time situations last year. So for instance, the Baylor game, but Big 12 football. Yay. Whatever. Super erratic. The ball literally sprays anywhere when it comes out of his hands upon release. And he either locks on to his number 1 receiver or he takes like as long as the last 15 minutes of church to get through his progressions. Pretty freaking disgusting. And his pocket presence is like, it's anxiety inducing. Like he's downright oblivious to pressure. He has no internal clock. He'll hold the ball as if it's like 7-on-7 and there's no pass rush coming really at any point, or he gets to count off as long as he wants before he can take off or throw the ball. So below average arm strength, and the ball hovers whenever he tries to drive it outside of the numbers. It moves in slow motion. And sometimes I blame QJ for his route running, especially like on his outbreaking routes where he just kind of pop up before he goes into his break out of his stem. But some of this stuff was just Duggan, man. Like the ball would just levitate and it would get to about like, if it's about 8 to 10 yards, and it would just kind of die. And DB could just walk in front of QJ and pick it off. So I was looking at my list, and when I got to like the 10th negative, I was just like, let's just stop, because I don't want to go on and on about how bad this dude is. We all know.
Yeah.
So
we don't need to pile on a 7th round pick.
Yeah. Dax mugging, just yeah. And no, to hell with, we shouldn't be crying over a 7th round pick. I am. This was terrible. And so
Dax Muggle.
Yeah, maybe. There you go. But no.
Yeah.
It could have been better.
It could have, for sure. So the Chargers believe Max Duggan can push Easton Stick for QB2 right away, which is obviously competition in the back of your roster. The pick is not only familiarity with the other 2 TCU wide receivers like we talked about, but most importantly, it's competition to kind of push Easton Stick a little bit, and that's important here in the 7th round. Another player they were thinking about getting in the 7th round, and they considered our boy Gerard Clark, interior defensive lineman. They were ecstatic to get him after the draft as a UDFA. They thought Duggan would have been harder to pull after the draft ended. So obviously he's got this competitor mentality, and he's got all this like competitive nature and things that teams could fall in love with in the UDFA process. They thought if we use the 7th round pick to pick him, we can bring him in rather than having to compete with other teams to fight over him as a quarterback. It all worked out for the Chargers. They got Max Duggan. They got Gerard Clark. Everybody's happy. They pulled it all off. And if you switch Gerard Clark here, who I was lucky enough to watch because Craig had told me about him. I was, asking, I was trying to put the graphics together for the sleepers in the interior defensive line class. Craig told me about Gerard Clark. I wanted to watch some more interior defensive linemen, got to watch him, was bitching from round 5 to 7 about, hey, Gerard Clark's still there. Gerard Clark's still there. They were thinking about him in 7. If you switch him and put Gerard Clark at 7 and Max Duggan as a UDFA, if that makes you feel better, fine. But they got them both, and that's all that matters. So we have hit 2 hours, gentlemen. Thanks, everybody, for still tuning in and sticking with us. By the way, before we get into our next part, which is going to be our least favorite and favorite pick, which I'm probably not going to be a surprise to anybody, and then draft grades, thank you, everybody, that joined us for every draft show, for the live draft show, listened to the podcast, joined us for all the interviews in between, everything we did. We appreciate every single one of you guys, because to have this many people watching here 2 hours later is pretty impressive, and we appreciate every single one of you. So before we get up and moving on, at the 2 hour mark, 2 hours later, just want a huge shout out to all of you guys, and thank you very much.
I want to echo that. Appreciate everybody for supporting us. All the draft prep shows, the live draft, even going on the live draft show when Garrett and I weren't there and sticking around and watching everything. Mm-hmm. We appreciate all the support, all the love. It's been a great draft season. Lots of fun talking to you guys and sharing our thoughts with you guys. And just to kind of wrap a bow on the Max Duggan thing, I'm going to draw a comparison. And anybody who's listened to this show long enough knows that this is not a compliment.
Oh, God. Here we
Max
go.
Duggan
we were just moving off Max Duggan to something positive about the people, thanking them, and here we go. Okay.
Just let me wrap it up.
Let's go. Put a bow on it, Jamie.
Max Duggan is a terrorist. He's a quarterback terrorist. He is a right-handed Tim Tebow, right down to the numbers. And no, that is not a compliment.
Good God.
He's a fullback playing quarterback.
Hey, what if Max Duggan's actually left-handed and he doesn't know it?
That's a strong possibility, actually.
He's been throwing with his right hand the whole time.
That would explain a lot.
Are you sure you're not left-handed? Oh, God. Well, Jamie hit on it. He's been calling him a terrorist throughout this draft process. Did it on the live shows, and here we are. And we kept going because we were getting we got notes that they were thinking about going quarterback in day 3. And we were like, there is one quarterback out there that makes a lot of sense, and nobody wanted to say his name. And man, when he was drafted in the 7th round, boy, did it all just come together. Max Duggan. So let's just get this out of the way. We're going to do favorite pick and least favorite pick. Let's just all list why Max Duggan was our least favorite pick. And I'll start because I'm assuming that's you guys too. I know it doesn't matter, but to me, this is my least favorite pick as the 7th round. Really, you probably could have got a UDFA quarterback to theoretically be in camp and compete with Easton Stick. The fact that you drafted Max Duggan didn't make a whole ton of sense. I get the reasoning, but it increases their chance of carrying 3 quarterbacks, which I'm obviously not a fan of. And Duggan is just not a good football player. Some would say Max Duggan even dragged Johnston and Davis's draft stock down, but then now you bring him back. And I get the reasoning for having him, but the Chargers forced me to watch more Max Duggan than any other mortal man could take. And for that, he is my least favorite pick of these 7. And I do want to say this draft was fine. And quite honestly, we're making a big deal out of a 7th round pick just because part of it's for comedic factor, also because he's not very good. But this was actually harder than normal. They reach usually in that 3rd round or somewhere in the 5th or 6th. And it's like, why are you taking, Trey McKitty in the 3rd round? That makes no sense. But here at the 7th, it kind of lessens the sting because it's a 7th round pick. But this to me is my least favorite. And this is my choice. Easy. Jamie, Craig, why is Max Duggan your least favorite?
Because he was giving birth. He was giving birth to.
Because he's alive.
Yeah.
Craig is a card carrying Max Duggan hater. Like he said at the beginning, I hope this fails. I'm rooting for Easton Stick. That's how he started off his Max Duggan breakdown.
And never in my life did I think that I would be rooting for Easton Stick to beat anyone out.
Yeah.
So imagine my surprise. But Max Duggan, least favorite pick. No more needs to be said about it.
Yeah, I know. And Jamie called him a terrorist. So I think we can, at that route, we can just move on. And
you summed it up pretty well. Yeah, let's move on.
It doesn't get much worse than terror. Right. An ambidextrous terrorist.
Tim Tebow, right-handed Tim Tebow. So let's go on to favorite. Craig, of all these picks, obviously 1 through 6, who is your favorite?
Surprisingly enough, the one that threw me off the most, Darius Davis. Actually loved that pick. After I had time to go back and understand that, even the rationale behind it, the process is like they felt like they had all their starter roles filled, which isn't necessarily true because they still needed a free safety. But there was no one that was going to fill the free safety role at that point, and they got a starter, not just a starter, but someone who could have a humongous impact on them from an offensive standpoint, whether it's scoring points or field position. And once you use that logic, it makes perfect sense. You went got someone that is the best at what he does in all of college football, and you landed him at a pick that makes sense for what he offers and what he delivers to your football team because you were deficient at that role for a really long time. So when you stop looking at him as just a wide receiver, shut up. When you stop looking at him for what he as a wide receiver and you pigeonhole him there and look at him for what he actually is, someone that can be a difference maker who can change the course of a game and be used as the weapon offensively, then I think that's extreme value at that spot. So that's going to be my guy, Darius Davis. And I'm looking forward to what he does offensively and special teams and what he provides offensively going into year 1.
Okay. Jamie, what was your favorite pick?
I'm torn between 2 guys. I'm torn between McFadden and Matlock, and I think I'm gonna go with McFadden, just because I feel like this is the 2nd year in a row they plucked a potential starting offensive lineman in the 5th round or later, and I like the traits that you're starting with. There's a good baseline there in terms of the feet and the athleticism and the length and the hands, the technique. It's all there. I don't think it's going to take much to polish him up and make him ready to play. So McFadden to me is I don't know that you can do much better in the 5th round with a guy who, like I said, I would have been comfortable with him in the 4th, if not earlier.
This is very, very interesting because we all have the same least favorite, but we're all going to go in different directions of our favorite, which tells you something about this draft class, which is they found some hidden treasures in day 3. And I'm going to go with the other one you mentioned, Jamie, and that's Scott Matlock. I didn't watch him during the process, but he feels so much like a hidden gem in this class. Again, I went back and watched him. I graded him. fairly, and he was a low 4th round pick, which means they would have taken him in the 4th. It would have made sense to me after watching him. He's a huge value pick with the incredible athletic upside, interior pass rusher who we quite honestly have been clamoring for forever. Now, they picked up SJD, which we liked, and Morgan Fox, which we liked, but drafting a guy who can win with athleticism and length, this is a really good pick here in the 6th. I think there was a knock when they made the pick because he was kind of a more speed, athletic pass rusher on the interior, where they were getting killed in the run game last year and they needed a run stuffer. When they picked up Gerard Clark as a UDFA, it almost makes this pick even better and even more promising, where you've got some pass rushing upside and a guy that can contribute pretty easily as a rotational guy. Getting Gerard Clark as a run stuffer on early downs, this makes a ton of sense. I love the Scott Matlock pick, and he was my favorite of the class. So let's move on to grades. So Matlock, McFadden, Darius Davis. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay, let's move on to grades. Jamie, how'd you feel about this 2023 draft class? And give us a letter grade.
Excuse me. I feel pretty strongly about this draft class. I think they addressed some pretty big needs, either with starters or guys who were going to play a lot and produce early, and they got really good special teams value and depth value late. I'm not really sure they could have had a much better draft, even with the Max Duggan pick in the 7th round, because I think they're going to get so much out of the first 6 picks in the draft class. And I even came around on the Henley pick in the 3rd, which is something I wasn't crazy about at the time. That pick makes more sense to me now after seeing more of him and hearing the plans for him. So I think I'm usually a pretty notoriously hard grader.
We know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because let's face it, Jamie hates everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go, I'm torn between a B+ and an A-, but I'm feeling pretty good. So I'm going to give them an A- for this draft. I think it's a very solid draft. They're going to get a lot of value out of 6 of the 7 picks. And there's some really great traits that they bet on and a lot of room for development and growth with all the guys they picked.
Wow. An A- from Jamie. Whew. Okay. Craig?
Yeah, man, I'm going to be echoing a lot of the same thoughts. Initially, I was seeing some grades out there like A-. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And again, it's just that kind of initial shock of the draft and really not having as much insight on some of these guys and having not spent as much time as, you would have liked on certain players. Some you just didn't see the point in. But stepping away from the draft and being able to take time out over this past week to just kind of review everything and get to understand more of these players' strengths and the plan for them, and getting the information on the rationale behind the picks and where they're going to fit. I don't think you can look at this draft picks 1 through 6 and not come away feeling like this team did an amazing job in player evaluation and understanding what it means to build a team moving forward. It's not something that I, as a Chargers fan, am accustomed to. It's actually pretty jarring. Overall, I understand all the picks, aside from Duggan, but everything else aligns, makes sense. And you got some guys in some pretty valuable spots that maybe had some higher draft grades than what we knew of from some of the experts, and then going back to watch them for myself, understanding why that was. So I'm right there. I thought A- was insane, but that's what I'm giving them. It makes perfect sense.
Okay. All right. Well, I used this analogy on the live stream. It felt to me like this draft was a lot of solid singles from Telesco. I don't feel like there was any home runs. I don't feel like there was a lot of extra base hits. I also, on the flip side, don't feel like he struck out really on any of these picks either. When you look at the consensus board, everybody felt like they were going where they were supposed to go. Darius Davis, of course, some thought he went a little bit early, but I don't feel like it's a reach when you get a decorated returner in this class and the best at his position. It makes it a lot more palatable. So I think it was a big need, and so it makes a ton of sense. The thing that worries me a little bit is, if you look at this draft class, did the Chargers do enough in this draft to kind of push them closer to the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals? They are a playoff team, no doubt, but did these kind of singles, quote unquote, propel them to be a substantially better team? The concern for me is, if everything pans out, we'll see. It'll be a couple of years before we see how this draft class actually, plays out. But did they play it too safe at times? And with some of these other players, did they pass on some of these guys that could have been home runs at different positions in this draft? So it obviously will remain to be seen. I think there's a lot of great depth. I think there'll be some starters down the line, but they filled every position of need they needed outside of tight end, which just obviously did not fall their way when you look at the board and how it fell. They got their yak receiver. They got their versatile edge 3 who could play inside. They got their athletic linebacker. They got their speedy returner who could be a gadget guy. They got some offensive line depth and some defensive line depth who could be starters later on. They got a QB3. That's what they needed. They got everything they needed on paper. The draft to me was a little bit better than fine. I don't think it was excellent. I don't think it was great. I think it was pretty good. So for me, they didn't hit on tight end, which is fine. I really like the back-to-back picks of Jordan McFadden and Scott Matlock late in day 3. I'm in the B plus range. I don't want to be a huge downer. I wrote down B plus, so I'm going to give him a B plus here. I know you guys gave me minuses, but we're pretty much in the same range. It just feels like if I were to improve anything, they could have gambled a little bit and bet on some other guys that probably could have been there in the first 2 days that they decided to pass on, in my mind. But while watching these guys, they all make sense. Even Duggan makes sense from a standpoint of familiarity with the system and competing with Easton Stick. Is that the guy I wanted there? No, but they picked him, and you get why he's there and why they brought him in the 7th round. So that's where I'm at.
So just to touch on the moving the needle against like the Chiefs per se, the Chargers for a little bit now have been playing the Chiefs very closely for the last few years. So you look at some of the moves that are made, the guys that are contributing, are going to contribute. And this is why Darius Davis is my guy, because if you're playing another close game with the Chiefs and something always happens, there's always this one play or something that doesn't work out, or there's some element that they're missing that could add to making that, actually tilting the game in their favor. If they have someone who can score points or give them better field position, just 1 or 2 plays, just that 1 or 2 extra plays in every matchup can put them in a position to win the game. Maybe Darius Davis could be that guy, and that could be someone who tips the scales a little bit. It's just one player. I mean, the rest of the guys are going to contribute, but I think, that's the element that was missing from the team, and having someone that can contribute in that fashion is pretty much invaluable. So you go into a game, a matchup with a particular team that it always feels like it could go any way, and the Chiefs always find a way to pull it out. Well, maybe this is your new trump card.
Very well could be. He's got the speed to absolutely be a trump card for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's a wait and see approach. I'm not gonna judge everybody on their day one production, but if you look at the 2023 season, QJ is going to be QB3. Tuli's probably going to be the edge 3 and contribute as a rotational guy. Same with Daiyan, who probably will, rotate with Kenneth Murray, with Kendricks. McFadden and Matlock, probably not going to see a ton of snaps. If we're lucky, we won't see Matlock. And then Darius Davis is going to be your returner gadget guy. To me, could they have got somebody who was a starter and maybe contributed more? I don't know, but it felt like there was a lot of solid singles, and that's great. They didn't strike out at all, but would Zay Flowers have maybe moved the needle a little bit more for me? Maybe. That's my only, just because you guys went so positive, that's my one concern from this class 3 to 4 years from now, depending on how all these guys develop.
Just to kind of add on to what Craig was saying, I feel like they've been playing the Chiefs close. They're always losing by basically one score late in the game. They're always right there. And one of the things that always kills them is a lack of depth.
Mm-hmm.
And they went heavy on immediate impact depth
For sure.
this season. They are suddenly 6 deep at wide receiver with 2 new guys who literally can touch the ball anywhere on the field and potentially turn it into points. They dramatically upgraded special teams with guys like Matlock and Henley and Davis. You'll probably even see McFadden on special teams. I mean, there's a really good possibility that their 3rd through 6th picks are all getting major special team snaps and making a real impact there. So I think adding that depth, adding some explosive playmaking ability, whether it's on special teams or on offense, the one touch and score kind of explosive ability, which they've really lacked for the last several years. Does it push them over the top against the Chiefs? Maybe on a game-to-game basis, but they're still behind the Chiefs overall roster-wise and coaching-wise. So I'm not sure one draft was going to push them over the top against the Chiefs just like that. But I think it got them closer, and it gives them a chance to win a game, maybe win 2 games, and maybe give them a little extra confidence heading into the playoffs if they pull out one of those games, or God forbid if they pull out both of those games.
All right. Well, anything else we want to add? It's 2 hours and 20 minutes later. I think we've said it all. But if you guys have anything else to add, now's the time.
Yeah, one last thing. So, I
I
know everybody gave thanks, so I definitely want to chime in here as well. Appreciate you guys for inviting me along to be a part of the team. This is my first, draft experience with you two, and how long I've been following you and been a fan of the lightning round and everything you guys do. So just having you consider me and bringing me on has been like, I can't express how appreciative I am of it. And also all you guys out there for welcoming me in and dealing with some of my quirks, especially in the Discord. We have a good time there. But again, thank you all out there. Thanks to Jamie and Garrett for having me be a part of things. And I'm looking forward to what's to come.
We're happy to have you, Craig. You've been a great addition, and we appreciate you. And I'm glad everybody's giving you love still. And thank you, everybody. All the information we dropped today about the backstories on all these picks was in the Discord. So make sure to join the Lightning Round Patreon for all that stuff. Jamie, Craig, I love you both. I appreciate you guys. This has been a fun draft process, and I'm glad we got to jump on here for almost 2.5 hours to talk draft stuff in this recap. So thanks, guys. And everybody else watching, we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Salute.